Hello, I have just read chapter 12 of Last of the Jedi Master of Deception. Thing I wasn't tempted to say against the Empire that time. Right then. So we're back with Clive and Astrid on their way to Nero 11. And it turns out Clive was the one who suggested Astrid to be his wife, to pretend to be his wife, and he's enjoying himself, he can't help it. And Astrid knows it was probably the best idea to pose as a wealthy couple seeking a safe place to stash the loot they're hiding from their homeworld tax authorities, but she can't help but feel uncomfortable. And we're told that they will pass scrutiny and get into the inner sanctum of the bank where an old source of Keats has agreed to meet with them. And they arrive at the spaceport in the rain, and they've been cleared while on their board their luxury class cruiser, and they get whisked aboard a private air shuttle, and they wind up getting to the bank, and they have, and as on their way, Astrid and Clive have a bit of banter, and Clive says, "Hey, I could get used to this. Hey, I'm already used to it. Being rich is not all it's cracked up to be." "No, that's right. You were married to a politician. Must have been an easy life." "Easy," Astrid repeated. She turned her dark eyes on Clive and gave him a look of such sadness that it stopped the jest on his lips. And they make their way over to the bank, and they make their way over to a room, and they're posing as Mr. and Mrs. Telstar. Actually, I'm curious if the Telstars were just creation for this book, or yeah, they were just a creation for this book, the Telstar family. And they're a fabulously wealthy couple that they're pretending to be. And one of the bankers, Herc Bloomy, comes over to them. And while they're waiting for them, Astrid has a bit of a bad feeling about the place, and Clive says the feelings of those who have too much and want to keep it all to themselves. And just then, that's when Herc Bloomy comes in, and he says, "Mr. and Mrs. Telstar, pleased to meet you. Herc Bloomy, director of new accounts at Bank Nilo." And Clive says he's pleased to meet them, and they're having to keep up the impersonation just for a little bit longer, as he says they're looking for a safe place to store their fortune. And he says, just what do you like to hear, eh? And Bloomy presses a button, and a curved wall lowers down around them, and then it starts to shimmer, and Bloomy explains. I'll just read out what Bloomy says. "We can see out, but no one can see in, and this blocks surveillance devices. Complete privacy, but we should be brief." And Astrid says, and they can now kind of lower the impersonation now, and they say, and Astrid thanks him for seeing them, and that Keats really said he'd agree to help. Bloomy says, "I am a banker. A banker believes in certain things. The sanctity of wealth," I think that's Sanctity. I was going to get that word wrong. The rights to, I was getting it wrong, just trying to read it. The right to privacy. I don't agree with what the Empire is doing. The financial future of the galaxy depends on the right of the wealthy to protect their accounts. We are now asked to hand over details of deposits and withdrawals on a weekly basis to an Imperial investigator. He shuddered. It's a terrible thing. And Clive can't believe that, well, the Empire's out there crushing societies. He's just... Bloomy's worried about some people's pile of credits. And Astrid shoots him a look which just tells him to be quiet. He doesn't say anything though. He hasn't said anything though, and Astrid says if he'll help them, and Bloomy licks his lips and says that Keats told him they needed information on one account. And Astrid says only one, it will help them enormously, and that he'll be doing a great service for the galaxy. And Bloomy says the Empire's disregard for rules offends me. That's the only reason I would violate a client's privacy. And you say you are trying to help this person? And Clive says absolutely, it's life or death and money. And Bloomy says alright, and he takes out the data pad and he says Yarrow Industries moved their accounts off well near the end of the Clone Wars. And Clive asks who, and Bloomy explains, at first Evan Yarrow, the chief officer of Yarrow Industries. After his death, his daughter Eve completed the transfer. It was under Imperial order. That happened to many of our clients around that time. So even the Empire moved the accounts. So even though the Empire moved the accounts, she still controlled it. Oh, very much so. She asks that we key the Yarrow accounts to numbers instead of names. We also wiped all evidence of ties to Acheron. Is the account still active? She asks, even though she knew the answer. Oh yes, regular payouts. Bloomy checked the screen. As a matter of fact, the payouts have been increasing of late. Where do the credits transfer to? Clive asks. A numbered account on Reverie. Do you know the planet? Many of our clients have homes there. And Clive's heard of Reverie. It's kind of like a safe space for the super rich, and it's known for its beaches, mountains, and privacy. And Clive asks if they can get Eve Yarrow's coordinates on Reverie, and Bloomy says no, addresses are strictly private, and Astrid says that the Empire violates the privacy of their clients and they can cross-check numbers with names, so if they do that, he must have the information in his files, and Clive just thinks, clever girl. And Bloomy says, I gave you the planet, isn't that enough? And Astrid says, suppose we were clients of yours and we needed a moment to confer. Couldn't you step out of the privacy room and leave us for a moment? And maybe forget to close the data pad? And Bloomy hesitates, but he goes out. And Astrid looks through the data pad. And also Astrid promises that they won't ask him for information again. But he leaves the data pad and he makes his way out, and Astrid looks through it and she says, he left the coded files open to his security code. Good man. And he suggests action is if I just jump to the numbered file contact info. Yes. And she tells Clive the coordinates and to memorise them. And Clive says got it. And she starts trying to find anything else. But Clive says that look out, the Imperial officer, Bloomy's here with some Imperial officers. And she puts the data pad down, and they're here to be verified on a security check. It's just strictly routine. And Clive and Astrid start being very repulsive to it, as saying that, oh no, we're just on our way out. We don't. But yeah, Astrid says, it says, Clive admired Astrid's coolness, posing as a rich woman. She put on an irritated look. Do they know who we are? She hissed at the banker, as in Bloomy. Strictly routine, madam, Bloomy answered. It will only take a moment. Now, Angel Hair, let's not hold up these gentlemen. This is the price we pay for a secure galaxy. Here you go, sirs. And Clive hands over there his ID docs, and Astrid does the same. And the officer says that if they'll just wait for another moment, because he's noticed there's something wrong going on. And Astrid says, "Our business is concluded. We were just leaving." And the officer says he must insist for them to stay, and they know they can't wait much longer. Because even though Cohen had used his best contact to get the ID docs, you can't always trust people in the black market, of course, and they know they're in trouble. And the officers move out to confer, and Bloomy says, "Do you think they know? Do you think so?" And Clive asks if he has a cruiser with a hyperdrive, and Bloomy says, yes, in his business he needs the best. And he says, "Right, you're not suggesting," and Clive says, "Give him the security codes and they can try to get it back to him sometime." And Bloomy says they can't just leave, and Clive says that he's afraid they have to, and in another minute the officer is going to get an order to arrest them. And he's still trying to keep a smile up. And Astrid says if they arrest them, they might arrest Bloomy too. But if he gives them his cruiser, they'll make it look like they just stole it from him, and he can claim innocence. And Clive says, "Just don't tell them who we're investigating, no matter what." And Bloomy doesn't know what to do, and Astrid says to look natural and tell her the code. And Bloomy tells them the code and asks how they're going to get to the turbo lift. And Astrid tells him that's just to leave that to them. And Bloomy says, "You're not going to use blasters, are you?" And Clive stands up and says, "My advice, duck." And Astrid says to let her go first, and they leave the little bubble, the little transparent steel bubble thing, and they make their way towards the turbo lift. And she says, "This is absurd. Our liner is about to depart. I demand to see your superior officer." "We really must be going," Clive said, taking Astrid by the elbow. The officer stepped forward. "Sir, you can't go." They kept moving toward the turbo lift, and the officer's getting a bit nervous now because they still haven't yet, because there's still a chance the ID dot confusion is just a snag, and he's reluctant to take responsibility for attacking them. And Clive says that they'll be available at the spaceport on their luxury liner, and Astrid says they can send their superior to their stateroom to sort things out there. And they close the remaining distance to the turbo lift, and the officer finally realises, hold on, if I don't neutralise them, I'm going to get sent over to be a security officer on some mining planet. And he draws his blaster and tells them to stop, and Clive takes a step forward toward them and says, "Don't be silly, I'm sure we can work this out." And the turbo lift opens, and Clive and Astrid draw their blasters, they shoot the lights, and they shoot to a sensor switch to bring down more of the transparent steel room things, privacy, and the officer's blaster fire goes a bit awry, and it pings off the transparent walls. And Clive and Astrid get into the turbo lift, and it descends swiftly, and Clive says they have maybe about a minute before they figure it out, and then you have to prepare to run. And they get to the landing platform, and Astrid blasts the security console next to the cruiser. And she says they won't be able to tell we have the code, and Bloomy might escape detection that way. And then the stormtroopers start spilling out, and Clive gets into the cruiser, starts firing it up. Astrid fights the stormtroopers off for a little bit, and she somersaults onto the cruiser and gets into the cockpit, and they head off up into space. And they're starting to get chased by Imperial starfighters. They make it into hyperspace. And Astrid asks, "Can we trust Bloomy not to talk?" Because if he does, then they might find an Imperial attack ship as they come out of hyperspace at Reverie. And Clive says he doesn't trust Herc, he doesn't trust Bloomy, because if they just show him a picture of a torture droid, he'll cave. But if they don't ask him, but they may not ask him the right questions and just assume that they were ordinary bank robbers. And Astrid says they could always go back to Coruscant. They exchange a look, and Astrid says, "Onward to Reverie," and that's where we end the chapter. Hold on. I think first off, let's talk about Astrid. She was quite good in this chapter. You know, I like how this chapter did very good at kind of balancing the humour with a lot of the seriousness. He did a good job at balancing that. You know, no, like of course her being a moody rich wife. You know that it was quite humorous to watch that, but also, you know, it talks about how she had experience about that when she was back being Bogdavinion's wife. Yeah, how she had experience being a politician's wife, being Bog's wife, and you can kind of see her being that stern, impatient wife, rich wife, and she does it. It's so humorous to watch it. To watch it, read it. And you know Clive is getting a blast out of this. He's getting an absolute blast out of this. You know, he really likes Astrid. You know he likes Astrid, so the fact he gets to pose as her husband, you know he's really enjoying it. And of course Astrid's all a bit uncomfortable about it. She's even though she knows it's the best course, she still can't help but feel discomfort. So yeah. Bloomy, very nervous. Again, I don't really trust him either to keep it a secret. But we'll see what happens when they get to Reverie. And again, I'm really struggling with this, with the Flame Investigations storyline. Because I got a bit confused again. I kept being disturbed while reading this chapter, so so it was a bit rough for me to pay attention to it. So they moved their accounts off well near the end of the Clone Wars. They removed any ties to Acheron. And the account move was under Imperial order and happened to many of their clients around that time. So though the Empire still moved the account, they controlled it. And they asked if they could key the account into numbers and certain names, and have all evidence of ties to Acheron. It's regular payouts, and the credits transfer to Reverie. Okay, so again there was suspicion of it being an Imperial controlled account, but it's just an Imperial moved account. Well, you know, Clive said he doesn't know if it's Imperial. If it was Imperial controlled. And she couldn't have moved it without. Okay, so I'm really struggling to follow this storyline. It's not really being well explained. At least to me, it's not being well explained. And again, you've got to remember these are young readers' books. They're young readers' books, and I'm struggling to follow them. So Clive thinks that Eve Yarrow couldn't have hid her fortune without the Empire knowing. They found out something about... and that the account was moved onto Nero 11 toward the end of the Clone Wars, and that the Empire, which had involvements with the banking clan, which Palpatine made accounts for the banking clan and corporations where they could avoid taxes and stuff. And then you got control over those accounts at the end of the war. But we learn here that they're not the Yarrow Industries account isn't Empire controlled. It was Empire moved. That the payouts are going on over to Reverie. Yeah, it's a bit difficult to follow at the moment for me. I'm still struggling with it. So yeah, I'm struggling with this storyline. If someone's read the book, You know, of course, don't give spoilers, but maybe make it a bit more clear as to what's going on. Because I'm really struggling with this storyline. The other storylines in the series so far I've been able to follow, but I'm really struggling with this one. So, what else? Again, Clive taking that step toward the officer and announcing like how they can't, announcing that something, I can't remember what it was. You know, that was quite a funny moment. So yeah, I'm a bit disappointed there wasn't more Keats. One of the things I was really happy about with Keats getting involved with this storyline was that, oh, we get more Keats. He only gets mentioned in this chapter, and he's not going to be on Reverie, so it feels a bit like, oh, we just had Keats back, and now he's gone again. It just feels like it's, at this point, Keats and Curran, they could have easily been written out the story, and just replaced them with, like, Dex. You know, you could have easily have done that. And very little would change in the story. Very little would change in the story, you know, if anything. They haven't really been relevant since Tangled Web, and it just feels a bit like, it just doesn't quite feel right for them to still be going on as long as they have, when they've had no involvement. I'm happy that they have stuck around, because, you know, I like Keats, it's one of my favourite characters, but it just doesn't feel like he should have stayed on this long if they weren't going to do anything with him really after Tangled Web. So yeah. Anyway, I'm also halfway through the book now, so repeat. I hope it gets a bit more clearer, the storyline. I hope it gets a bit more clearer, the Eve Yarrow storyline, because again, I'm really struggling to follow it at the moment. And even explaining it out loud really just doesn't, like I just stated, you know, it really doesn't help. What was it? Chapter 6? Yeah, here we go, found it. Yeah, Nevo 11 was owned by the banking clan, which means its accounts must have had some relation to the accounts that Palpatine set up for the banking clan and corporation, so they could avoid taxes on accounting, and Eve Yarrow Industries was moved there. And even though we've learned that the account is not Empire controlled, it is completely owned by Yarrow Industries, you know, maybe that still has something to do with maybe there be something going on with the Empire there. Don't know what, but maybe something. But yeah, I'm really struggling to follow the Eve Yarrow storyline, so I do hope it gets a bit more clearer as it goes on. You know, or like, you know, when it comes to an end, be able to try and backtrack it, understand how it came unveiled a bit more. You know, because at the moment, it's really not clear. It could have been explained so much better, and it just hasn't. And I think that's probably my main frustration with it so far, and I think it was an interesting idea to bring up at the end of Against the Empire, but the way, and it is an interesting idea, but the way they've gone about but the way James Watson's gone about doing it, it is a bit, and again, these are young readers' books. I'm fairly sure they're intended for kids, and I'm struggling to follow this. So, yeah. But anyway, I think that brings an end for this review. So, thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello, I've just read chapter 13 of Last of the Jedi, Master of Deception. Got that name right again. So, Ferus has just tried contacting Obi-Wan, but he hasn't replied through their emergency channel, and he's thinking, what could he be doing? Herding banthas? And he continues on his way, and he's donned the Inquisitor robe again. He hates it, but he knows he can help him get information and get what he needs. And he's heading for the spaceport, and he can only hope that the letters and numbers that were in the dust had something to do with the spy seen through that he saw that was spying over the port and the park that he saw, if you remember. And he has a feeling Obi-Wan knew that the Force Adept was Bale's daughter, and he thinks, why else would he have sent him there? And we're told that Ferus hasn't seen Vader since that morning back at the palace, but he feels Vader, not through the Force, but instinctively, as if he's in the space around him. Near him, and he touches the hidden pocket where the holocron is nestled, and he feels his lungs burn, and he takes a ragged breath, and he says, he felt as though he were falling into a black hole, slowly, while familiar faces, people he loved, homes he'd lived in, places he'd enjoyed, were all around him as he spun past them, unable to touch them, unable to connect. His salvation could be the small object in his pocket. Grief had not only sapped his power, but his purpose. The Force could restore it, but not the Force he knew. He took his hand away. He no longer knew which thoughts were coming from him and which were under the influence of the holocron. That scared him. But it filled him deeply too. He knew he should throw the holocron away, toss it in the deepest point of the great lake of Alderaan. And the holocron starts speaking to him, saying, you cannot throw it away, it is yours now. By accepting it, you own it. You have already begun the journey. Soon you will recognise it. And he's wondering whose voice that is. He feels as if the voice was part of himself. And he wonders if it's speaking truth or lies, and he wonders what's happening to him, and then he gets contacted by Hydra, who says she's checking in, and Ferus says he has nothing to report, and he asks how the document search is going, and she says that she's getting full cooperation now that Vader's on the planet. And she says that they're worried about an Imperial takeover, and they have fear working for them now. And there's a tinge of satisfaction in her flat monotone voice. And Ferus says to keep going and contact him if she learns anything. And he thinks he's racing the clock now. He doesn't think Hydra will learn anything about Leia in the documents, but she will soon give that up and look a different way. And he needs to write off the rumour as false before Hydra can get to Leia and find her. But also in the meantime, he has to find the Imperial spy, and he makes his way over to the spaceport, and people are a bit and the workers cower a little bit. They're a little bit terrified, and he starts speaking with a woman and says that he has an information request and just needs to identify this vehicle. And he says the spaceport code is LCS 79244-21U712. And she says that's not a vehicle code. First asks what it is, and she's a bit hesitant, and first has to say something that he absolutely hates saying, but he knows he will get him the information he needs. He has to know. He feels like he has to know, but he has to say it to be told the information. And he says, would you rather Lord Vader came here to inquire? And he hates saying it. He hates having to say it, but he needs to know. And she looks down and explains it's a product entry code. LCS means load, coded and shipped. That means the delivery system came into the spaceport and they shipped it out again. And Ferus says they must have the address then. And she says she'll plug it in, but she can guarantee him there will be no information that comes up because the destination code is wrong, as there aren't enough numbers, and there are no letters in the destination code. She knows it was stripped to order, the code is 12, but the rest doesn't make sense. And Ferus says to see what she can do. And funnily enough, it is Ferus's politeness, he's trying to be as polite as he can. you know. Of course, he can't reveal that he's a double agent to anyone outside of his trusted friends. But you do see me still trying to be polite, and it kind of reminds me of some other Inquisitors, like Tremaine or Jerick, who have a very polite way of speaking. And it is a little bit off-putting, because those two Inquisitors, if you know them, they are very sadistic. Tremaine is quite crafty. Jerick is, just a pretty much just a mix of Vader and Palpatine. They're very much very evil characters. So the fact that Tremaine's being genuinely polite, it's off-putting when he's an Inquisitor, when he's not actually intending to do harm, but he's still an Inquisitor, and it's quite off-putting. But anyway, she calls up the list of shipments and says that she can't find the address, and she shows him the screen, and Ferus notices that she's not lying. And she says that we get hundreds of shipments, your numbers don't make sense in terms of the system, and Ferus sees that she's not lying, and it'll be impossible to trace what the shipment is without the correct sequence and numbers. And he turns away frustrated. He knows now, at least he knows it's the shipment the spy had been looking at or heard about, but there was no way to know, and he thinks he can't leave the planet until he has answers. He can't leave the Organas at the mercy of the Empire, and something's going on, and the knowledge of it is deep in his bones, and he had to keep looking. He spends the night in his temporary quarters on Alteron that were arranged for him, and he wakes up before dawn and decides to that if he searched the warehouse again, that's where he found the spy with the electro binoculars. He decides that if he searched the warehouse again, he might come across something he'd overlooked. It's still dark when he makes his way over, and he's crossing toward the warehouse when it says he saw it, and he thinks back to what Siri used to say: "If you want to get lucky, open your eyes." And he thinks, "Thank you, Siri." As he notices crouched between the taller warehouses and hangars, he sees an old, decrepit building that he hasn't noticed before, and it's built out of old stone and bleached and pockmarked from hundreds of years of use, and it's about 10 floors tall, and it appears abandoned. Ferus, he keeps walking, and Ferus notices that there's some numbers chiselled into the stone in the old style. It's hard to read, but it was 8712, and he thinks back to the U that he had seen marked down on the dust, and he thinks that maybe the U was on how there was a smudge on there, and he thinks that maybe the U was the lower half of an 8, the lower part of an 8 that had been wiped off. And he thinks, could it be this easy? Could the shipment have been sent across the street from the spy's overlook? And he thinks, well, why not? If you want to keep tabs on the shipments, what better place could there be? And so Ferus crosses back, carefully examining the building as he walks past, making sure it doesn't look like he's looking. Because even from the area seems deserted. He knows there could be some workers in the surrounding buildings, and he thinks even the spy could be at his post. Even though the spaceport traffic's light this early, and in the short time it takes him to walk by, he's able to spot a security panel and identify it as one he recognised, quite high tech for the age of the building. And he turns the corner and goes down the block, and he passes many of the warehouses and notes that they have landing platforms, whereas this older one doesn't. And that older one actually has a fence around it with some sort of electroshock capacity, most likely. Ferus leaps over it, and he makes his way into the warehouse. And there's some surveillance droids in there that floats by, but they have visual readings, not infrared, so he can hide in the shadows and avoid them. And he makes his way up the floors, and he doesn't find anything. really of anything useful. It's just rusted speeder parts, really, and old systems of automated pulleys. With lots of old parts, and as he makes his way up, it's kind of like all the same, not really much use. And he makes his way to the top floor, and he looks up ahead, and he sees a retractable roof, a roof that could be retracted, and he thinks that would be how the shipments could be moved in and out, and there is plenty of room to land a small barge in here if the operation was done at night. The offloading could be quick and close, and to private. It says, if the operation was done at night, the offloading could be quick and close to the private in the middle of close to private in the middle of the city. There we go. And he thinks at first the floor looks like the others, but he notices there are lots of Durasteel bins that are quite new Durasteel, and he looks over at them and he sees there are some letters stenciled in them. LCS 2265-79244 space 12 space 8712, sorry. And speeder parts are stamped on the side, and there's multiple of those Duracell bins in there, but they're empty. And he then takes out some glow light, runs it across the floor, and he's able to tell there's a craft that was there. And he starts thinking for a moment. He stays there for a couple long minutes thinking, and he's so deep in thought he couldn't hear the soft footsteps coming up the ramp until they were almost at the top, and he winds up dashing for cover, whereas the room suddenly lights up with blasts of fire, and he dives to the floor and rolls, and he curses at his inattention, and Ferus, whilst the safety behind a partially dismantled air speeder, and he smells hot metal as the blaster fire pings, and then he runs behind a pile of dismantled parts to get a sense of how good of a shot his pursuer was, and it was a good shot. And he thinks good information to know to have when you're trapped. And Ferus considers what to do. Because he thinks he can't escape with his lightsaber. That would draw too much attention, and he doesn't he would just draw more attention to over to Alderaan, which he needs to get the attention away from Alderaan. And that information will probably get back to the Emperor, and Ferus doesn't exactly want to explain to the Emperor why he, as a supposed Imperial Inquisitor, was investigating a mystery shipment being tracked by an Imperial spy. And again, he doesn't want to throw the spotlight more on Alderaan out using Force activity. And what he thinks is a pushback, something to send his pursuer fleeing, and he can trail him. And he leaps to the rack, and he leaps above to the rack and pulley system that still holds old parts and engines. And this is the part where I struggled to follow. I was struggling to follow this. It got I searched up rack and pulley on Google. It winds up being like workout stuff, and that is, at least from how I'm understanding, that is not what's being described here, and it was a bit so this part was a bit difficult to follow. But he activates the pulley and starts pushing off all sorts of metal things, and it starts scaring the pursuer off. And Ferus's aim is to corner him, but he's just moving so fluidly that the pulley system just isn't fast enough. Again, this part was a struggle to follow. And he thinks if only he was strong enough in the Force to give heavy objects a little push. And the Holocrongo starts speaking, saying, "You're forgetting what your age can do." And again, his irritation at the spy surprising him was just a spark, something he had accepted and released. It had been so unimportant. It got in the way of Jedi battle minds. He revived it, fanned it, his anger grew. How dare he interfere with me? He just a low-level spy. He thinks he's going to win. He is nothing. And he starts throwing all these parts, and he hits the pursuer's head, and he sends it all flying about and toward the spike. And he thinks satisfaction starts coming through him, and I've seen him flee, and he thinks he can smash in, he can kill him, he can destroy him, and he sees a shadow move toward the door, and he sees it's a tall, thin figure that seems familiar, and he thinks how remarkable that through the red haze of his rage, you can still see the figure. And the hologram says that you use the anger, it does not confuse, it sharpens, and this spy runs down the ramp, and Ferus jumps down, and his mind kind of cools from the rage, and he doesn't feel any satisfaction now. He in fact feels guilty, and he pushes away the feeling as he'll have to deal with it all later, as he has to track the spy, and so he follows the spy without him noticing, and as the spy likely thinks that he needs to climb over all the wreckage. I mean, he's destroyed this room as well. That's 2 rooms Ferus has destroyed so far. You know, that two books he's drawing on the dark side properly with training, with some sort of training or guidance from Palpatine. You know, that's twice he's destroyed a room with the dark side. But he follows him to an underground passage, and Ferus thinks, oh, of course there was an underground passage, and he starts kind of kicking himself for not expecting that, and he follows his pursuer. Well, now he's the pursuer, but he follows his assailants up to a new turbo lift. And he makes his way up once again, and he comes out onto a fairly busy street, and now the sun's starting to rise, and he's on a fairly busy street. And he notices, notices that there seems to be grav sleds and utility ramps set up at the end of the street, and he realises it's an open air market set up next to the spaceport. And he follows the activity in the market, and he thinks it must have been a permanent fixture, as large squares filled with stalls that march in winding rows, and the divisions are made of heavy it says the partitions, the partitions, or Partitions, were made of heavy durasteel poles and brightly coloured awnings, and open bins held piles of items, and he makes his way through, seeing different merchants and stuff, chatting or basically setting up their stalls, and he makes his way through the crowd trying to find the figure he chased, because even though he hasn't seen his face, he gets the feeling he could recognise him from his height and the way he moved. And he bumps into Dira, Advisor Dira, and he actually has a basket full of fruit and muffins, and she moves it to another arm as if she can't trust Ferus not to steal it. And Ferus says, I'm just enjoying the bounty of your planet, and she says, it seems your empire believes that our bounty is yours for the taking. And then she says, seems afraid of it, as if she's said too much, and she quickly walks off. And Ferus just stands in the middle of the market for a moment, because he can't reach out for the food, and people, and the people, and people who despise him, and the last couple lines are this: inside his tunic was a dark future. A path lay before him that all his life he had known was wrong. He has wanted to kill Roan. He wanted to kill that spy, just as Vader had killed Roan, for no good reason except he was in his way. If he killed Vader using the same kind of power, would that turn him into another version of the Dark Lord? Ferus pressed his chest with his hand. He felt his heartbeat. He saw everything ahead of him. All the wrong he could do. He was being pulled along that path. Why couldn't he stop himself? And that's where we end the chapter. Oh, that took me about, I didn't realise it took me almost 20 minutes to just do a summary. Okay, let me have a drink then. There we go. I guess first off, the dark side moments in this. Again, the thing about the dark side moments, it always comes across as a bit jarring, because it does feel a bit like, that's not Ferus. That's not Ferus. It does come across like that. But also, the thing with the dark side moments, it's I like how it's often left ambiguous as to whether the thoughts are coming from Ferus and the holocron, but we kind of know. We kind of know it's coming from the holocron. But it is technically left ambiguous. But it doesn't stop it from feeling a bit jarring. So yeah. But you know, you just get to see like how far the holocron pushes Ferus. You know, he almost loses his main lead just because he gives into the dark side. You know, he almost kills his assailant when he when he shouldn't have, and if he did wind up killing him, he would have lost his main lead. He would have to answer to Palpatine, you know, the exact thing he knew he shouldn't do, and didn't want to do. And you know, immediately once he snaps out of the dark side, you know, he just feels guilt. He feels a lot of guilt. But he has to kind of push it all aside to continue his pursuit, of course. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what the shipment is now. You know, we kind of got an idea as to what those numbers and letters are. You know, it's a shipment, but it's going to be interesting to see what the shipment specifically is. It's going to be interesting to see what the shipment specifically is. But yeah. What else can we say? Yeah, again, the whole scene with the pulley and the rack, I was struggling to follow that scene so badly. At least it isn't like the Eve Yarrow Flame storyline, you know, where it's you need to follow that like as a whole. This is just like one scene where really the outcome is what matters. You know, it's just a part. It's just a part of a scene, not part of a storyline. You know, so it's a little less. So it's less insignificant than it was with like the Evie Arrow storyline. I'm not struggling as much with that, but you know, it's still a bit of a struggle. It was a bit of a struggle to follow that scene. What else can we say? What else can we say? What else is there? What else is there that we can talk about? Again, it's going to be interesting to see how Ferus gets the trust of the royal family, if he does. If he does, you know, it's going to be interesting to see how he gets that trust, if he does. It's going to be very interesting. So, yeah. And, you know, you kind of get to see how, even though Ferus, you know, he does lean into certain things that he doesn't want to, but, you know, he kind of has to. And yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see when he does finally contact Obi-Wan, what Obi-Wan would think, you know. How I have a feeling at this point he probably will be able to tell that something's wrong with Ferus, you know, something's happening with Ferus, and it's going to be interesting to see what that interaction between them is like. You know, so that's going to be interesting. And, you know, it's the first couple of lines, it was, what could Obi-Wan be doing? Herding panthers? You know, it was, that was quite a funny line. Also, you can't get to see a bit of Ferus's impatience there, you know. And you also get to kind of feel like see how the holocron feels to Ferus, you know, feels like he's falling into a black hole. How everything is around him, but he can't reach for them, he can't connect to them. and he feels like the only way he can defeat Vader is through the holocron, and you see how Ferus is struggling, and you see I guess it's his pain, really. So yeah, you really see how he's struggling. Like, you just want to give Ferus a big hug. You know, you just want to give both Ferus and Trevor big hugs. Yeah. So speaking of Trevor, next chapter is, I assume, going to be them rescuing Min and Audrey. So yeah. I think that may just bring an end to this review, because I don't know if I have anything else to say. So, thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello, I've just read chapter 14, The Last of the Jedi, Master of Deception. Lina was so savage in this chapter. She was so savage in this chapter. But, you know, let's not get ahead of ourselves just yet. Weigel and Trevor, they're waiting for Lina and San Arbor. But the one problem is, what does it say? They know San Arbor varies their routines, so they knew she could arrive at any point. And waiting isn't too hard, it's where they're waiting. That was the difficulty, because they're hiding behind a star yacht inside the grill. And it's hot, it smells, and you know, they have to wait there for hours on end. Trevor doesn't read, and of course Weigel isn't the talkative type, so Trevor can't really make conversation with him, and all he really was able to get out of him was, later or soon it will happen. And Trevor just thinks, thanks. And they stuck there for hours waiting for San Arbor and Lina, and as the sun is setting, San Arbor's pushed chromium airspeeder finally appears. And San Arbor kind of does a circle around the plaza, just to show herself off, before landing at the platform, and while she's doing that, that gives Trevor enough time to notice that Lina's in the back, and he tells Weigel that Lina's in the back. And the transport lands, and Trevor and Weigel get out, and we saw that they decided to grab Lina in the small reception room that lay beyond the entrance, as their occupants at the hotel could take off their outer garments and access the turbo lifts to take them to their private apartments. And they make their way in and follow San Arbor and Lina in. And they hear San Arbor talking to a protocol droid saying, "Take this cape and press it. And no, I do not want the Shorgain tonight. How many times have I told you? The Emerald Satina. I'm going to the opera." And Weigel signals to Trevor that it's time to take Lina, and they were getting ready to take her away, and they start forward, but Weigel pauses for a moment and goes to the turbo lift, and he whispers to Trevor trouble, and they get into the turbo lift, and they make their way to the top of the turbo lift and put the panel back, and they start listening in as San Arbor and Vader, and of course, and Lina's there as well, all come into the turbo lift. Trevor was wondering why they were meant up there, when he heard Vader, and San Arbor says she didn't know Vader was back in Imperial City, but she's been meaning to have a chance to talk to him, and he promised more human adult subjects. And Vader says, "He promised me progress," and she says she's made tremendous progress, but she needs it's all in her reports, but she needs subjects. And Vader says, "You've done enough research, it is time to produce the agent." And San Arbor says, "I don't have time for this. I have tickets to the opera tonight. I am meeting Senator Solo." And Vader says it's not finished, let's step inside into the turbo lift, and it starts rising. And Trevor looks up and wonders just how much room there will be between the turbo lift and the roof of the shaft. Because of course he doesn't want to get crushed, and he can't really get out this way, can he? And Sanabo says she's a perfectionist, and that's the reason he hired her, correct? And it's hardly time to push her now, especially since they're so close to the end. And Vader says this is exactly the time to push her, and she's too cautious, and she says, I'm a scientist. Vader says, you are a coward. And Mygal listens in intently, and Zanarbor says, did you come here just to learn at me? I can contact the Emperor, you know. He might be interested in your strange urgency. And then the turbo lift shudders and starts going back down, and the shake of the shudder almost throws Trevor off, but Mygal's able to keep him on. Actually, no, when it stops, Trevor almost drops off, but as they're going down, Zanarbor says, what are you doing? You didn't even touch the sensor. And Vader says, I have done what I came to do. I will be back tomorrow, when I will want to hear a plan to have the memory agents online within a month. And Trevor is holding on to the turbo lift pretty much with his life, and Zanarbor demands Vader to stop to slow down the turbo lift, and if this is a display of his force ability, she hardly needs it, and she's an expert. And Vader says, saying that you're an expert only proves how ignorant you are. And the turbo lift stops, and Trevor is almost jerked off. But Mygal's able to keep Trevor onto the turbo lift. And as Vader leaves, Zanarbor says, you will hear about this, Lord Vader. And the doors close, and now they know this is the time, because Zanarbor's already a bit shaken from Vader. It's time to jump in. And they make their way down, and we're told that the plan was for Trevor to protect Lina while Mygal handles Zanarbor. But as Trevor drops down, he trips down on Zanarbor's cape, which is on the floor, and Lina kneels down to treat him. It kneels down to protect him. And Zanarbor starts opening fire on Mygal. And Lina starts opening fire, and the blaster bolts ricochet about. And Zanarbor turns to shoot Lina, but Lina, this is where the savageness bit starts. It says, Lina reached forward and pressed a delivery syringe full of a blue-grey liquid into Zanarbor's ankle, and Zanarbor screams out and drops the blaster, and she starts writhing, falling to the ground and beating her head against the floor. And she reaches for Lina, who starts drawing back, and she goes, no, no! And Trevor asks what she did, and Mygal says, as he clips his lightsaber back onto his belt, he says, she gave her the memory agent. And Lina whispers to Zanarbor, not in any mean or menace way, she only has resolve in her voice, you will never use your brilliance to hurt people again. And Zanarbor puts her hands to her head, and she's saying, the formula, I'm losing it, tell it to me. And Lina's silent, and the turbo lift begins to go back up again. And Zanarbor keeps talking about how she's forgetting things, saying the interactions of chemicals with organic substance, the formula for toxic delivery systems by water. It's gone. My experiments, I can't remember them. My training, my genius. The Bibinja formula, my work with the transmission of plague elements, it's gone. Chemical equations, the amount of weight times gravity times. And Nina says it was a full dose, and says that it's not targeted, so she has no idea how it will affect San Arbor, but she thinks at the very least she'll lose all her scientific training, which is about 50 years worth. And San Arbor says, "Who are you? I don't know you." And Lena takes her into her apartment and says, "This is where you live." When she says, "I don't know, where am I?" When she asks where she is, Lena says that they're in their apartment. And San Arbor then says, "You did this to me. I remember enough to know I was a genius. Now I'm a nobody. A nobody! You might as well have killed me!" And Lena makes her way back to the turbo lift. And they start going back down. And as they make their way down, they hear San Arbor's screams. Again, Lena was savage in this chapter delivering that memory agent. It's kind of, really is a bit of a yes moment. And I bet for a lot of people who've read Jedi Quest, that must have been an even bigger yes moment. But it was quite to me at least, it was quite a funny moment, especially with some of the wacky names of some of the experiments, which again I assume will be very familiar to some people who've read Jedi Quest. Again, I could be wrong on that, but you never know, maybe it is familiar to people who've read Jedi Quest. Again, I've not read Jedi Quest, but this really was a yes moment. There is one thing about this, it does kind of feel like... It does feel a bit like Jenna didn't have a whole lot of presence in these books. I assume this is going to be one of the last times we see her. I think she's in the next book, but, you know, she's not really going to have much to do in that book, is she? But it definitely just feels a lot like she didn't have a whole lot of presence. She definitely could have been a lot more threatening, and maybe she was a lot more threatening in Jedi Quest. Maybe she has a lot more presence and much more threatening in Jedi Quest, but she definitely could have had a lot more in this book, in this series. You know, she kind of came across more as a little bit of an idiot at times. We just didn't see enough of a scientific genius in these books, and I think that is probably, even though Jude Watson does a great job at catching up with the characters, I do think Jenna was probably one of those characters she didn't do as good of a job of in informing you of her past. Like, we learned a little bit about how she's a scientist, how she wreaked terror on so many worlds, and used her own formulas to heal those worlds, and made a fortune from it, but we could have seen a lot more about how threatening she is in these books. In Last of the Jedi, and she just wasn't really that threatening in Last of the Jedi, unfortunately. And so if I ever do go to Jedi Quest, you know, hopefully she's a bit more, a little bit more, what's the word, threatening in those books. So yeah, but that ending though, I found it very funny. The ending to that chapter. And it definitely just does feel like a yes moment. So yeah. What else can we talk about? Vader's not going to be happy when he finds out that Jenna has lost pretty much all memory of scientific training, especially to the formula. And I forgot to mention, Lina took San Arbor's starter pad, so she can't even check that to see what her formula was, or what her formulas were. So, poor Jenna, to an extent, not really. But yeah, the ending, that was, to me, it was just so funny, so funny. Also, you know, Senator Silver, I'm going to be interested to see what relevance he would have if he appears in this. I hope we kind of get to see him, because it definitely feels like he's not quite being as involved as he could have. So yeah, he felt very involved in Tangled Web, but it just feels like since Tangled Web he doesn't quite feel as involved. I think that's mainly just because he's no longer technically a senator. He still goes by senator, but he's technically not a senator anymore. And it's a bit confusing because it said he was still a senator in Return of the Dark Side, I think. And then because he says, okay, because he's still got good voting power for the Palpatine, he'll vote for whatever Palpatine wants, but then it says he's not a senator, and it's a bit like, hey. So it's a bit, Solo's a little bit hit or miss at the moment. He just could have had, it just feels a bit underwhelming at the moment. So hopefully he gets a bit more presence as we go on. Going to be interesting to see where Lina, that's where her story leads to. If it leads anywhere, they kind of rescued her now, so it's like, what else is there going to be? What else would they do with her character? But yeah. Trevor, again, funny. It's funny as always. So yeah. Can you tell I've run out of things to talk about? Well, the main thing I was to talk about was the ending, and that was about it. So I think to stop this from dragging out, I think I'll end the review here. So thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello everyone. So I have just read chapter 15 of Last of the Jedi Master of Deception. So Hydra has contacted Ferus and told him that there's been a break in the investigation, and she discovered there was a weather forecasting satellite overhead on the day the accident happened, and that the findings include ground photos, and they apparently meant to be wiped at the end of each day. But she went into the computers and found a cache with old information, and she found the day in question, which was a Thursday. Ferus feels his heart full, and he just says, that's good news, of course he needs to keep it up. And Hydra says, unfortunately, whatever the incident was, she can't locate it. But the satellite only covers a portion of the park during the time in question. But she was able to cross-check it with airspeed or ID tags, and she said they'll miss out on those who arrived on foot, but if they squeeze the others for names, they'll really be getting somewhere. And she says she has almost everyone who was in the park that day, and she can interview all of them. And Ferus is thinking this is exactly what he doesn't want to happen. And he says that he'll observe the interviews, and Hydra says, if you must. And it says, he got the distinct impression when he disconnected that she was either exasperated at his incompetence or suspected his loyalty. Neither was a good sign. And so the interviews that Hydra's having with the citizens gave Ferus a close-up look at their dignity and fear. How it's clear they really loathed them, but they had a politeness and fear when it came to their dignity, and in their fear, they knew the Inquisitors have the ability to throw them in an Imperial prison without trials or charges. And we saw that Hydra's good at her job, and he watched the way she inspected the dwellings, the way she's very attentive and perceptive, and the way she asks incredibly detailed questions, how she holds their fear in her hands and squeezes them. The interviews make Ferus feel ill, and he thinks he needs to stop doing this. He's not cut out for it, and the holocron says that you underestimate your ability to be cruel. And at the end of the day, Hydra is barely concealing her fury, because all she got was because the Alderaanians wouldn't give up any name, even if she talked to the children, and all the names that they did get were fairly common first names. and they all claim that the park was too crowded to see anything. And it reminds Ferus of the loyalty back on Belasa. Everyone, and it makes him proud. And Hydra checks her data list and Hydra checks her data list at the end of the day, and she says she can always do a second round of interviews and maybe start detentions off planet. And Ferus says he doesn't think this warrants it, and he asks to check the list, and he notices, oddly enough, that Hydra has left out a name, Sona Simba. And it says he would have let it pass, but it wasn't like Hydra to overlook something. Why had she? Hydra looks over, and there's no expression on her face, and she just says, "Let's check it out." And we're told that Sona Simba lives in a large apartment block, and we're told that Ferus misses ordinary life, and that he feels his own isolation even more with the life swirling around him, and he's apart from all this now. And the Holocron says, "There is nothing here for you to miss. Ordinary life is nothing." Ferus thinks, no, ordinary life was everything. And the Holocron continues saying, "You are kidding yourself. Recognize that and begin a more important journey." And the thoughts sound so loud that he's wondering if Hydra can even hear the thoughts. And they make their way to the 53rd floor, and to Ferus' surprise, it's the woman who he met in the park, if you remember, the one who was the mother of Chula. And she's a bit startled to see their Inquisitor cloaks, and Hydra starts off by saying, "Sona Simba?" And she introduces her, and this is the part that gets a bit confusing. Because I know Ferus is technically being counted as an Inquisitor, but Hydra is still technically the Grand Inquisitor. So this line gets a bit confusing. Hydra says, "I am Imperial Inquisitor Hydra, and this is Head Inquisitor Ferus Olin. We have a few questions for you regarding your presence in Grasslands Park 1 week ago Thursday." So it's a bit odd that... I know Ferus has been referred to as an Inquisitor in this book, but Hydra has, for the 2 books now, been referred to as Head Inquisitor Hydra, and has she been demoted? I know in the next book she gets referred to as Head Inquisitor again. So it definitely feels a bit again, Ferus has had the Inquisitorius put at his disposal, so maybe he just has adopted Head Inquisitor, but it isn't properly his position. We don't really know. Anyway, Hydra walks past Sona, not waiting for her permission to come in. And she asks if she was there on that day, and Sona says that she's there every day with her daughter, her husband, and has a business. Her husband and her has a business, and it failed, and her mother passed away, and she used to take care of Chula, and that she died last fall, and that she takes care of Chula, and takes her there every day now. And Ferus recognises that she's a bit scared and nervous, and she's giving off more information than needed. And Hydra asks if she knows about the incident, and she says she didn't see, and Hydra says, "But you know of it," and she says that the parents talked about it, and Hydra asks for the names, and she hesitates. Ferus can see she's about to lie, and she says she doesn't know the names, but they just chat sometimes, they don't ask each other's names, and Hydra makes a note, and the door slides open, and a tall, thin man walks in, and his arms are filled with a basket of food. And Ferus is surprised, because he'd seen that man at the first day in the park through his electro binoculars, and he realised why the shadowy spy seemed familiar. It was this man. It was the husband. And he realises that the spy and this man are one and the same, and Sona says, "Starton!" And she says, "You're home? These are Imperial Inquisitors, they're asking about Grasslands, something that happened there." So we learn that, it's Grasslands Park. And Hydra gives a little sign to Darton, saying, "Strictly routine." And Ferus thinks that Hydra had given the man an "it's alright" signal. that she's isn't it well, but he had seen it, but Ferus had seen it. And Hydra knows the man's a spy, and Ferus is guessing the man's wife did not. And we're told that's why Hydra didn't bother to investigate, because anything her wife would have seen, he would have reported. And Ferus looks around at the apartment and feels a bit of sympathy, because he can tell this family doesn't have much. The wife had lost her job. Darton puts the basket down, and Ferus recognises the food from the market and wonders if Darton worked there, and he thinks that he's no doubt been corrupted by the idea of wealth for his family. And he thinks how the Imperial recruiters work. They promise that you won't be betraying them, you'll just be giving us little bits of information here and now, and they slowly build you up to give you even bigger and bigger and bigger pieces of information until you're too far in and you can't back out. And by the time you realise you have betrayed everyone, it's too late. And Ferus knows how it happened now. He had been looking down, he'd been bored with the spaceport, looking at his family, and had seen the incident with Leia, and he had reported it because he had nothing else. And Ferus asks if Darton works in the market, and Hydra, and he nods. Darton nods, and Hydra says to have a good evening, and they'll contact them again if they need to. And they go down to the street level, and Hydra says the Imperial Governor is arriving tomorrow, and Organa forced the Emperor to take action with Antilles fleeing when Vader arrived. It was a stupid move for him to send Antilles when Vader arrived, and she says, did he think the Empire's reached an extent to Terra Asta? And she snorts and says, so much for his so-called intellect. Alderaan will soon discover that it can't operate if it doesn't cooperate with us. And Ferus walks into the soft evening air, and his mind starts buzzing with the information Hydra dropped. And he realises that even though Darton Zimba is a spy, he couldn't have been the spy that had caught Ramus, because that information was strictly private. It was strictly private between Dira, Dira, Bale, Breya, and Ramus. It was strictly private. Of course, he listened to him, but we know it's not Ferus. We followed him. He thinks that someone must have overheard or placed a bug in the reception room, and he did hear a bug when he was in there. And he knows that there's another spy on Alderaan, and this one's much more dangerous than Darton. This because this spy is in the palace. Now we know it can't be Memely. We know it can't be Memely, but you never know. Maybe it is Memely. I'm betting it's either going to be Dira or Memely. I think that's who it's going to be. It's probably going to be one of those two. Again, we got it's definitely the investigation's getting a bit tense here. And I like that we can't get to see a little bit more about how Hydra works. Again, we haven't really seen, even in this book where Hydra is featured quite prominently, we don't really get to see a whole lot about her. So this was quite nice to get, for the most part, a Hydra-focused chapter. So it was quite nice to have that for a chapter. Get to see a bit more of how Hydra is and how she works. And again, you see how Hydra, she feels emotion, but she doesn't show emotion. She feels emotion, but doesn't show emotion. So, yeah. And it's interesting that she knows a lot more, and it makes you wonder, does Hydra know that Ferus is a double agent? Because both Palpatine and Vader are aware that he's a double agent. There was a conversation between them earlier in the book where they're talking about how Ferus is a double agent. But does Hydra know? And does she know? Ferus is questioning, does she doubt his loyalty? So it's going to be interesting to see where this starts leading to with Hydra. So yeah. Anyway. again, we found out who the spy is. What else? Again, you really see how Ferus is getting quite tense here. So yeah, I think that brings an end to this review. So yeah, I'm not sure what else I have to say here. You get to see how Ferus, he misses a normal life. And I wonder if it's not just he misses normal life, but he misses his life. But again, he misses his life with Roan. He misses that life with Roan. It's said so much throughout the books that he just wanted to go back and live his normal life with Roan again. And you really see just how much he misses that ordinary life. And even though the Holocron's denying it, we know that Ferus is missing it. We know Ferus is missing it. So yeah. Again, you just want to give Ferus a big hug. What next? What next can we talk about? Yeah, I'm not sure if I have anything else to talk about really. So no point of pushing this out then. Next chapter is about Ferus as well. So yeah. But anyway, thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello everyone. I have just read chapter 16 of Last of the Jedi, Master of Deception again, almost said against the Empire. So, finally, Obi-Wan replies to Ferus on the holo call. And Ferus allows that frustration to get out. He doesn't even bother greeting Obi-Wan, and he just immediately says, "You knew that Leia Organa was a Force-sensitive child." He spit out at Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan's lion's face was impassive. "Ferus, don't deny it. I'm not denying it. You could have saved me a whole lot of trouble. Why didn't you let me fly blind? Why did you let me fly blind on this case?" "I didn't tell you for 2 reasons. 1, I wasn't positive it was Leia Organa. And 2, if it was her, the only way I'd know how vulnerable she was would be to let you track her." Ferus says he doesn't even fully understand that sentence, let alone his reasoning. But I understood it. And everyone says that he had to know if there was a spy on Alderaan, and just how vulnerable she was to being found. And Ferus says, "Well, let's select you, Mesa, withholding information then." And he says he's been chasing around Alderaan like an idiot, and everyone just smiles, and it makes Ferus even more angry, and Obi-Wan says it's hardly an idiot, because he found out who Leia was, which means she's more vulnerable than he thought. And he says he bets he found the spy who turned her in, and Ferus says, "No thanks to you." And everyone asks about Leia and if she's strong in the Force, and Ferus says it's hard to say, he didn't pick anything up at first. That she definitely has a Force connection, but those around her won't know it. And without support or training, the connection will likely wither. But she will be exceptionally quick and bright, perhaps with fast reflexes, and right now she's vulnerable to being picked up only by another Jedi. And Obi-Wan says, "Or Sith," and Ferus goes, "All Sith, yes. As the years pass, this will change." And Obi-Wan asks about the spy, and Ferus says that the spy isn't a problem, and that he says his take is that he's acting as a low-level functionary, a spotter, and it's clear he's doing it for the money, and as opposed to overlooking the main spaceport and probably reports on unusual arrivals and departures, and he's guessing he just so happened to spot Leia and report it, because he had nothing else to do. But anything else to give them, sorry. And he says that he's tracking a shipment, that he was tracking a shipment as well, but he couldn't quite figure out, but he doesn't know what it is, or why. And Obi-Wan asks what the problem is, and Ferus says he believes there's a spy in the palace, and he explains how Remus Antilles was caught at the was caught at Terra Asta, and now the only ones who would know would have been in Bale's inner circle. And Ferus and Obi-Wan says you have to tell him, and Ferus says that I can't remember. Double agent, I have to help him without him knowing he's helping him. He can't keep turning up to the palace for no reason. Unless Obi-Wan has a suggestion, and he says unless you have a suggestion with a bit of irony, because Obi-Wan really has not been much help to him yet. And Obi-Wan says he'll talk to Bale and explain that Ferus is on their side, and Bale will believe him. Ferus says you're going to let Bale know you're alive, and Obi-Wan says he already knows, and I'll just read out this little last bit for this scene. Ferus almost threw the comlink against the wall. Is there anything else you're not telling me? He barked. There's a great deal, Obi-Wan said, but it wouldn't help you to know. So you say. Go to the palace, Obi-Wan said. I'll contact Bale. Obi-Wan and Ferus are so funny together. They're so funny just because Obi-Wan is so collected and calm, and Ferus who just keeps getting frustrated at him, and it's very funny to read them. Anyway, then we cut over to the palace. And Bale, now knowing who Ferus really is, he says that he's doing them a great favour, and they owe him a debt. And Ferus says that Bale puts himself on the line every day in the Senate, and he should be thanking him. And Bale says to come to their study, they can talk to their friends there. A hologram of Obi-Wan's waiting, and Bale explains he sent everyone out the palace today at Obi-Wan's request, and he upgraded to the highest security in his office, so everything will be scrambled, coded, and then erased. And he asks Obi-Wan, he says, now my good friend, tell me why you asked for these things. And Obi-Wan explains that Ferus thinks there's a spy in his household, and Bale says that's impossible because everyone is either family or friends, even the servants. And Ferus says that even if that's so, he heard from Hydra that Imperial security already knew Remus was going to Terra Asta before they intercepted him. So they targeted him, and he heard that from Hydra. And Bale says, but when he gave the order, there were only Breya and Dealer present. And Ferus says someone must have been listening, and Ferus was listening. But we know it's not Ferus. Bale shakes his head. He says he can't believe it. And can you really blame him? They almost soundproof the room. Ferus had to use the force for actually listening. And everyone says that he has to believe it, and that he has to set a trap for the spy. To have one that close is dangerous, not just to him, and Bale intercepts him, and says, but Leia as well. And he says he sees that, and first says he have to set the trap. And Bale says he's glad Obi-Wan has contacted him. Because he also wants to talk to him about Moonstrike and what to do. And asks if he's heard of it. Obi-Wan says that Ferus has done a few favours for the leader Flame. And Bale says that she had contacted him about Alderaan joining the group. There's apparently meant to be a first meeting of resistance leaders from planets in the core. And Mon Mothma and him have decided to go slowly with their resistance efforts, because he says what will be strong must be built with care. But he says Flame has a different take, and he wonders if it's a better strategy to strike now while the Empire is still gaining power. It's still a little bit weak at the moment. It's still having to gain its power, so he's wondering if it would be worth attacking now. And he says, Alderaan is vulnerable. Things are changing so fast. I want to protect my homeworld if I can. If he has alliances willing to help us. Bale let his voice trail off. And Obi-Wan asks if he's asking for his advice, and Bale says Obi-Wan's his best counsellor. And Obi-Wan says that Ferus and him no doubt disagree on the issue. And he says a linkage of resistance movements from planet to planet is of course a goal. Through that, I assume he's encouraging it. But he says the question is timing, because more planets are going to be reluctant to fight a resistance because they've just come off the back of the Clone Wars. They're really just hoping for peace and prosperity. They're just also empty on a lot of stuff. They're just depleted. They're empty of weapons, empty of spirits, and Belassa's a rare example of everyone coming together to fight the Empire. And most are just glad for peace and hoping for prosperity. And he says to create a full-out rebellion will be difficult, if not impossible, at this time. And he says, in the meantime, those resistance leaders who will be needed later will be exposed. So I would advise you not to join Moonstrike. Waiting is hard, but sometimes it is smarter. Bale says, you believe this is the case? And Obi-Wan reassures him that it is. He believes it. Ferus sees that Bale's wavering because he had agreed with Flame that Moonstrike needed a political component, otherwise Moonstrike could be doomed. But Obi-Wan hasn't changed Ferus's mind. In fact, it's done the exact opposite. Now he feels more inclined to help Moonstrike. And that's where we end off the chapter. First off, the conversation between Ferus and Obi-Wan, that was hilarious. Because you just know how frustrated Ferus must have been, yet Obi-Wan, he's just... You know how Obi-Wan is. He's fairly impassive. It's more of a... He just kind of speaks casually. You know he's not really... You know he's not really provoking. He's a bit nonchalant, I think that's the word, nonchalant. Yeah, nonchalant. And then you have Ferus who's just frustrated at all of Obi-Wan's crypticness and keeps challenging him. And it's, the ending line for their conversation, it was he just wanted to throw the comlink against the wall. That was quite funny. But also you understand it from Obi-Wan's perspective. He wasn't absolutely certain it was Leia. And he needed to know just how vulnerable they were. If he told him that it was Leia, then it might put Leia in more danger. And so you can understand why Obi-Wan did it. You understand why Obi-Wan did it, but it is a bit funny with how he went about it, What next? What else can we talk about here? Again, if Moonstrike does wind up being a ploy to take out the entirety of the resistances in the core, or other worlds as well, I wonder if this is why Alderaan winds up, I guess, not being, the resistance there on, with the rebellion, it doesn't get to, what's the phrasing I'm looking for? That's why Alderaan, doesn't get kind of demolished. Next chapter is on Reverie, with Clive and Ashira, of course, investigating Flame. I'm still really struggling with the Flame storyline. I'm really, really struggling to follow that storyline. And again, I'm hoping when it comes to an end, I can backtrack. But I think this is actually going to have to be probably the first time in the series where I'll probably have to write down some notes. Which is very strange, because I have not had to do that for the entirety of this book series yet. I haven't had to do that for the entirety of the book series yet. So yeah, I had to do it with Plagueis. I was really struggling when it came to trying to figure out Plagueis. In the chapter 17, I almost could not figure out what on earth that chapter was going on about. Once I did, it was a very clever chapter, but it just was too... It was just really roughly phrased in Darth Plagueis. But yeah, I quite enjoyed. Anyway, back to Last of the Jedi. Master Deception. I quite enjoyed this chapter, chapter 16. It's going to be interesting to see what that trap is. I wonder what that trap's going to be. And just again make you wonder, could it have been Gila, whatever it is, whatever her name is, however you pronounce it. Because it can't be Breya. Like, come on, it's not going to be Breya. Just watch, it's going to be Breya now, isn't it? I'm just thinking, I'm thinking that it can't be Breya. I doubt it's Memely. Like she was only ever honest to Bale. Well, I don't think it's going to be Memely. Maybe Memely though. You never know. We'll see. I think that brings an end to this review. So yeah, thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello, I have just read chapter 17 of Last of the Jedi, Master of Deception. I keep wanting to say Against the Empire for some reason. Now, I'm going to say this now. Chapter 16, that was the first chapter I read today, and I think I'm only bringing this up now because for this book, I've been trying to upload the videos, compile all the chapters I read that day into one video, but I think this is going to have 2 days worth of chapters I read, so, or maybe even 3 days, you'll see. But anyway, on to chapter 17. So, Clive and Astrid, they've made their way over to Reverie. And it looks as beautiful up in space as it's reputed to be on the surface. And Clive puts in the coordinates for Eve Yarrow's home. And Astrid says that they just hope to say Clive says that they just have to hope that they escape detection. And by some miracle, even if by some miracle Bloomy did talk, the report of 2 bank robbers will be all over the security channel now, right now. And Astrid says it could be, but they'll know soon enough. And Clive gives her a quick glance and says, "Hey, you like this?" And Astrid says, "Don't be ridiculous." Clive says, "You do." And she says, that's an awful thing to say. And Clive continues saying, "I'm not saying you like the Empire, or that you're glad there was a war so you could go flying through the galaxy with a molasses strapped to your leg. It's just that you're not afraid. You like the adrenaline. You're the one who got us out of that mess back there. So what gives? I thought you were a politician's wife, giving teas and running receptions. Were you some kind of spy back before the Clone Wars? You've got a pretty dumb idea what a politician's wife does. Teas? Receptions? I ran a policy think tank until Bog eliminated it after we came up with real solutions to planetary problems." And Clive says that she hasn't answered her question, and she explains that she used to run around with the Jedi and helped Obi-Wan rescue Qui-Gon, pretended to be a bounty hunter, shaved her head out, learned how to shoot a blaster, pilot a swoop. That should all sound pretty familiar to people who've read not Jedi Quest, Jedi Apprentice, but maybe a bit of Jedi Quest in there. I don't know, I haven't read those books. And Clive says, "You surprise me, Astrioza. Every time I think I figure out who you are, every time I think I know what you're about, you turn out to be something else." And Astrid says, "That's your flaw, Flax. You don't get it. People aren't about one thing." And then she says that they need to keep an eye out. They can't trust the machines to do everything. And they need to have a visual sight scene, and Obi-Wan taught her that. And he says, "You'll be getting us a place to land near Yarrow's house." And he says nobody wants to be neighbours, seems to want to be neighbours. And it's true, because a lot of people on Reverie, they like their isolation. They live so far away you can't really call them neighbours. And they like to be fairly isolated. And Evie Arrow's house is kind of built into the mountains of a cove. And it's almost invisible if you and could have been looked invisible if you weren't properly looking for it. And they wind up finding it, and Astrid observes there's a landing platform and a small hangar, and Astrid says, Clive says that there doesn't seem to be a big welcome mat, and asks if there's a clear space nearby they can land, and Astrid says that they can go try the top of the mountain. They'll have to hike down, but at least the cruiser's going to be hidden. And so they land at a rocky outcropping, and hike down, and they make it to the house coming through a steep ravine, and they're scratched and bloodied. And Clive trains his binoculars on the hangar, and he doesn't see any vehicles in there, or not even an airspeeder, and Astrid says they have to get closer. And they don't particularly want to leave their little hideout in the trees, but they know they've got to get closer. And they have to risk it because they just can't stay there all day. And Clive says, if someone's here, I'll say we're lost. And that seems far-fetched. I can convince anyone of anything. No, you just think you can. Come on. The thing is, Clive and Astrid, as much as Astrid, it doesn't, as much as Astrid doesn't exactly trust Clive, is that the word? I think maybe, they have such great banter, and you can kind of tell that they've got something going on with each other, there's a spark between them. They make their way over to the home, and there's no security there. No security at all. And Clive says there's not even a security screen, says it's weird. And Astrid says that maybe they maybe because they're so isolated out here, they feel they're protected. And Clive says one thing's for sure, nobody is home. And he reaches into his utility belt and removes a small item. And as she says, a rusty coin. Are you going to bribe your way in? And Clive explains, not just any coin, and it isn't rusty. This is a rare coin from the planet Mail, 1,000 years old. Only several hundred were made before they discovered it had a fatal flaw. The king of Mail had a queen whom he loved. She had hair, they said, the colour of a flaming sunset. He used a special alloy of metals to get that exact hue. Then they discovered that the coin was useless for trade because it was so malleable. Not only that, when heated just a bit, it would expand to fill a space, then harden. Ruined many a minting machine before they cancelled the coin. It's the rarest in the galaxy now. And as she says, it's mildly interesting, but what's he going to do with it? And Clive doesn't answer. He takes out a fake ID security card, and he says, they use cheaper plastoid, it works better. And he warms the coin in his hand. He then puts it in between the security panel and puts in the ID security card, and the panel pops off, and he's able to start working the security. There we go. And he's able to get the door to open. And Astrid goes, "Okay, I'm impressed." And Clive asks, mildly or extremely, but he doesn't get an answer, poor Clive. And they make their way in, and it seems deserted. The hallways are dark. Here it is. The hallway was dark and cool. As she moved carefully, trying not to make a sound, her blaster was in her hand now. They explored the lower floor. The house was furnished in comfortable style, with sleek couches covered in plush fabrics and colourful rugs on the stone floors. The wide windows took in a view of the sea far below. A protocol droid stood inactive in the hallway near the massive front door. The kitchen was stocked with prepared food in the freezer. And as she says, it's just waiting for a visit, you could just walk in the door. And Clive notes that there is no dust. Even though it seems to be deserted, there's no dust. And maybe there's the housekeeper, maybe they're housekeeper droids that are activated on the timer. And they make their way upstairs, and all they really find are several white robes and tunics of varying fabrics. They can't really even tell whether they're for men or women. But it is quite interesting, because Flame, if you remember in Secret Weapon, was described as wearing white. And Clive says that there's just no information here, and he says if this is Eve Yara's house, she doesn't use it much. We can't tie her to Flame or even the Empire if there's nothing here to find. And as she says, let's look downstairs again, and if there is something there, it won't be in the obvious places. And Clive starts examining the shelves, and he gives out a low whistle. And he picks up a dark crystal. I'm just going to read this out. He picked up a dark crystal embedded in a polished stone and held it up. Look at this. The crystal refracted the dim light in the wall and sent shadows skittering on the white walls. No, I didn't say in the wall, I meant in the room. The crystal refracted the dim light in the room and sent shadows skittering on the white walls. It's the Emperor's favour. As she moved closer, examining the crystal, at first it had looked stark and beautiful, but something about it made her shudder. A hunk of rare obsolite crystal embedded in a stone from Corriban, Clive explained. He put the object back and rubbed his hands on his tunic. Given to the chosen of the Empire's elites, heroes of the Clone Wars, those who do special favours. And as she says, that's interesting, Eve Yarrow is one of the Emperor's elites and she's been awarded. And they continue the examination, and suddenly Astrid notices that something's off. She looks at the walls and windows and notices there's something wrong, there's something off. The place is too small. She remembers seeing the place from seeing how it was in the mountains from above when they were flying over, and she notices that there's a room missing. It's like there's a missing room, and so she does a little bit of digging, and she knocks on the wall and figures out that there's a room on the other side, and Clive wonders how they get in there. And Astrid moves towards a laser painting that's hung on the wall, and she tilts it this way and that, and then a laser comes out of the painting onto the wall, and it opens the door. And Clive asks how she did that, and she says, she says that she heard of using laser paintings as security devices, and it's a brand new system from top secret from Securities, and she learns about it when she was slicing into the main BRT computer on Somalia. And they look into the room, and Clive says a hideout, and they walk in, and Astrid finds it odd that if it is a hideout, there's no supplies there. You know, you would expect food in a security panel, but there are none. And Clive says it could be a storage room, or then the door shuts behind him and he finally finishes and says, a trap. And that's where we end the chapter. You just know there's something between Clive and Astrid. You know, earlier on, you know, it was, he says, what was it? It was, you like this, don't you? Which I assume that he was referring to himself, but then he started talking about how, you know, she enjoys the thrill of the adventures. And, you know, But then, of course, a little bit later on, you have the banter between them. And Astrid, she is quite... she keeps putting Clive down. She keeps telling Clive the truth, really. But it doesn't feel mean. It feels like playful banter. And I really like their dynamic, and you can tell there's something between them. The main thing of note, I'm happy that this this chapter was actually fairly easy to follow for once in this storyline. Out of the 4 chapters we've had, only like 2 of them have been, to me at least, comprehensible. This one and the one from Against the Empire, where Clive went to Acheron, if you remember. Those are the only ones that feel like they were comprehensible. The other 2 in this book, Master Deception, they've made no sense to me. I wrote it down and it started talking about, I checked the previous chapter and it was like A. So it's like, okay, so apparently Palpatine created the banking clan, created the secret accounts for the banking Calantini, and that. But it's not talking about like how the accounts are completely controlled by Palpatine, and that would be the perfect place to hide your wealth. And it's like, that doesn't make any sense. It does not make any sense. How are you going to hide your wealth from Palpatine in an account that's controlled from him? By him, it just doesn't. It just doesn't make sense. It just doesn't work. It's one of this is a storyline that could be much better explained. It could be so much better. It could be. I'm trying to can't even speak. It could be so much more well explained, and it just isn't very well explained, unfortunately. It is interesting that we learn a little bit more about Eve Yabo. We learn that she's an Emperor's elite, which does tie her to the Empire. Which means if they can tie Flame over to Eve Yarrow, they can kind of realise that she's trouble. So that's a useful piece of information. And at least that kind of makes sense. And finally, something that does make sense in this storyline. What else can we talk about? Again, it's interesting that this place is abandoned. It would make sense if it is Flame's place, because of course she's not living there at the moment. She's travelling the galaxy, but it's interesting that it is abandoned, and it's going to be interesting to see how they get out of that trap. If it is a trap, it may not even be a trap. It wouldn't surprise me if it winds up just not being a trap, But we'll see. We'll see how this goes. Next chapter seems to be Vader speaking with Palpatine, I think. Vader speaking with Palpatine. So it's less. It's not even 2 pages long. But it goes on to 2 pages, but you know how it is. Really, it's only a page long. Really, because it's on 2 pages, but it's you've got a third of a page, and then you've got 2/3 of a page. Making that chapter over 2 pages, so really it's only a page long. So yeah, I may read that now. Is there anything else I can say about chapter 17 before I end this review? I'm not sure. It's going to be nice to see where that storyline with Clive and Astrid goes. I've kind of rooting for them, I think. I am still just a bit disappointed that Keats isn't with them. Again, the thing is with Keats, he just hasn't had much relevance since The Tangled Web. Since The Tangled Web, he hasn't had much else going for him. This is probably the biggest role he's had since the Tangled Web, and it's barely anything. He's really only has relevance in one chapter. So it's one of those things where it's, why does Keats need to be there? Especially because he's got all the files there. You know, he's got all the files downloaded into Dex's computer. He could have easily just had to be Dex. And that's there, you know. It just does feel a bit, with Keats. Again, I kind of wish, if they weren't going to do anything with him, that they would kind of write him out the story. But at the same time, I'm happy he's not being written out the story, because I love Keats. I really do like Keats, but I'm just sad that he hasn't had a bigger role. You know, I started reading Tangled Web like last month. You know, it's been about almost a month since I've read. I think it's probably been about a month since I read Death on the Boo. It probably was around this time I was reading last month that I was reading Tangled Web. So it is a bit disappointing that Keats hasn't had a big role since in a month. And I'm happy he's had occasional appearances, but it just feels like, can't we just get a bigger role for Keats, please? But yeah. Anyway, I think this brings an end to this review. I'm just blabbering on at this point, so thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello everyone! So I've just read chapter 18 of Master of the Jedi, not against the Empire. I've been doing so well. Master of Deception. Now, this is a very short chapter, so I won't have a lot to say, but I've got to make a review on it. So Vader is quite pleased with how his meeting with San Arbor went. This is not going to be good for San. And he's congratulating himself on how he approached the conversation. He thinks that Jenna San Arbor needed incentive. That and a screaming fast ride in an out-of-control turbo lift. And he has no doubts that tomorrow he'll hear a different tune from her. He definitely will, with her memories gone. Oh, this is not going to go well for Vader. This was such a funny chapter to read the first couple lines, because because we know what's happened to Jenna San Arbor. It's reading it's just like, oh Vader, you have no right to be as pleased as you are at the moment, because it's not going to wind up being as good as you think. She's just lost her memories. And so this is a very fun, so you know, the first paragraph is quite funny, as well as the second one. But then he thinks his plans are coming together, and then his master starts calling him, and he has no unease taking it, as he has information that will please the Emperor. And Palpatine says that he needs the report, and he says it in his most severe tone. Vader says he have made progress, Twilight is ready, and Phase 1 is already in motion. And Palpatine says, good, and Orderlan. Vader says the governor will be arriving tomorrow, and he says their contact assures that all is in place. There we go. Palpatine says that he must return, that Vader must return to Alderaan then, and that his work is there for now. Vader says yes, and yes, Master, and he knows he has to obey the order, but he hopes he can find some time to corner San Arbor again, because he wants to make sure she'll have the memory agent online soon, and he thinks Ferus can't touch him with a lightsaber. He must not be allowed to touch his memories. And he thinks his memories are far more dangerous. Vader's kind of pleasure in this chapter is really funny to read, with the context that we as the reader have, because we know that Jenna San Arbor has just lost all her has just lost all her scientific memories. She can't remember the formula, nor can she check the formula because Luna Nowtree took the data pad with the formula. Now, I actually do want to quickly check back to that chapter where they talked. Where Vader and I want to check that chapter where Vader and Palpatine talked earlier. Just to try and figure out what. Just to try and remind myself of what phase they were on. That's chapters. I haven't really go this far back. There we go. I have to go back to the 30 page. That's almost 100 pages ago. That's almost 100 pages ago. I had to go back to page 37 and I'm at page 126. Yeah, but what phase was Twilight Zone said to be in that? Yeah, the first step of the final phase is only in a few days. Okay, so phase 1's now in motion. Also, chapter 18 starts on page 124. I'm on page 126. That's chapter 19's. It's weird. I've always fun with the book, yet it doesn't feel that way. It doesn't feel that way, especially because there's, what was there, 154 pages? It doesn't feel like I'm halfway through the book. It doesn't feel like it at all, but I've only got 5 chapters to go, and then I'll be finished, so it's weird, very weird. Anyway, what can we say about... What else can we say? Again, what is Twilight? What is Twilight? Again, I have my suspicions that it was Flame, but now I have my suspicions that it might be the spy by inside the palace on Alderaan. I'm really struggling to figure out what... I don't know where this is all leading to. I have no idea where it's leading to. It's a shame because this is 9th out of the 10 books. But the next book's going to be the last one for this series, unfortunately, because it's the last book in the book series. Of course, not for the reviews, as a whole, just for the Last of the Jedi reviews. Next book will be the last one, because that's the last book in the Last of the Jedi series. It's a shame, but we're thinking a bit too far ahead at the moment. You know, I haven't even got to that book yet, Reckoning. But I quite enjoyed this chapter. Again, Vader, it was very funny to just watch how much pleasure he has when Jenna Sanabo, she's just lost everything. Again, what is Operational Twilight? I'm going to be interested to see if there's going to wind up being a confrontation between Ferus and Vader at some point in this book. It's going to be interesting to see if if there is a confrontation or not. I know they duel in Reckoning. But it's going to be interesting to see if there's a duel here, or if it leads into a duel. I have looked at the last page, but I haven't properly looked, so... It just says, Aaron is perfect for the job. So, yeah. But anyway, I'm going to end the review here, because I'm just blabbing on at this point, so thank you very much for watching, and goodbye. Hello everyone, now I've just read chapter 19 of Last of the Jedi Master of Deception. We're back with... It really does not feel right at the moment. It feels like I'm still halfway through the book, even though I'm almost at the end. I only got 3 more chapters to go now. This is definitely like setting up for the next book at the moment. or setting up the next few chapters maybe. So it's really weird. It's really weird at the moment. It feels very weird because I still feel like I'm halfway through the story, even though I'm almost at the end. But anyway, Keats, Curran, and Dex are huddled in the safe house in Thugger's Alley because they've spent hours on the communications going back and forth between the various resistance groups, trying to reach an agreement for a meeting. Things are far from settled. And Dex says he thinks it's best if they shut down communications, at least for a while. He says they've already pushed their limits and they don't want to do too much activity, otherwise they'll draw the Imperials there. Otherwise they'll risk an Imperial scanner picking up the increased activity. And Keats nods and says, "I wish." And then Dex turns his round in his chair and says, "We got trouble, my boys." And Keats and Curran look at the security screens and just freeze for a moment. There are Imperials in the Orange Districts and Thugger's Alley now. They're invading. They probably intercepted the uncle. Or maybe it's Flame if it is if she is a spy. And Keats says that, and Keats goes, "They're landing on the roofs." And you just can't quite believe this is happening just yet. And Dex says that, "You know the drill, boys. Be prepared for this day. I'll see you at the tunnel." And they start wiping all the data pads and computers. And they know they only have seconds to do the job. And they fuse circuitry so that all communications in a storage would not only be inoperable but be impossible to trace. And it's too late to warn anyone who might be in the vicinity to keep away. But they know that the Imperial presence is probably big enough that the people in the Orange District are going to start spreading the word. The presence is just so large. And Dex has to go and wipe his research library, which is tough for him because he spent years at making that research library. Here it was. He had spent years amassing information, and now it will be gone in a moment. It contained beings and planets and possible scenarios for revolts on different planets, as well as information on systems, cities, minerals, mines, out-of-the-way spaceports, cantinas, where one could be sure to be left alone. It was too dangerous to download it onto a chip. He knew the likelihood of capture, despite all his precautions. At least some of it was in his head. And we're told that months before, Dex had prepared for the move to the Orange District. This is before Last of the Jedi, I'm fairly sure. At least before Underworld. Actually no, it will be before Last of the Jedi actually. But we learn that Dexter prepares for the move to the Orange District with his usual thoroughness. He did much research into the old maps and histories, and blasted his way down to Thugger's Alley with some discreet explosives, and then used sensor equipment to figure out how to tap into an agent's alley that had once connected with Thugger's Alley. And Dex had spent long days below ground with Orion and other members of the arrays, which he could get 4 days' work, and they managed to dig their way with a converted version of a mole miner through the rock into what remained of the agent's alley. And he knew that they'd never make it, and he says he knew they'd never make it out through Thugger's Alley or off the roof. The tunnel would have to save them. And Dex meets the others in smoking hallways, and Curran says that they've got bad news, and Keats says they blasted through the roof! Used too much explosive. The debris blocks our access to the turbo lift. We'll have to come at it from the other wing of the house. And they exchange glances because this is the worst case scenario. The debris is blocking their path. And it's the escape routes means they have to take the hallway that runs across the front of the house, and they can get caught between the stormtroopers entering through the roof and the stormtroopers entering through the front door, and they wouldn't stand a chance. And Dex says to get moving then. And we're told that the safe house was designed to be confusing. To have false walls, have twisted hallways, pretty much to be difficult to trace. And they can still hear the stormtroopers always uncomfortably close, and they're charging down the hallways behind them and blasting down doors, and they can hear them searching through the rooms and the sound of their communications. And Dex says if they get through the armoured door downstairs in the next minute, they'll be in trouble. And then they hear a blast wave, and Keats goes, well, no, it doesn't go well, but he says, they're in. And they hear the stormtroopers start marching up the stairs, and Dex has a little trick. He pulls a little trick, he presses a button on his repulsor lift chair, and the stairs drop down into a ramp, and the stormtroopers all tumble down, and Dex explains what happened, and Keats says Dex says that he'll buy them a minute, and Keats says, we need more than a minute! And they have only one more, and Keats draws his blaster, and they have only one more hallway to go, and one last burst of speed to get to the turbo lift. And the stormtroopers behind them are so close they can hear the headset communications now. And the stormtroopers start saying, nothing so far. Use explosives on the walls. They could be hiding behind them. Not too much this time, the house is unstable. Continue on northeast quadrant. Meet up with squadron 3610. And they turn the last corner and see stormtroopers spinning up the ramp that Dex said. That Dex to smoke, that Dex turns into a ramp. And they see other stormtroopers climbing over their comrades, and Cohen and Keats let loose with their blaster fire, and the stormtroopers return the fire. And Dex rolls and shoots, and we're told his main objective is to protect Dex, who can make the repulsor lift chair travel, but he can't manoeuvre it to escape a barrage of blaster bolts. Just doesn't have that kind of manoeuvrability. Curran keeps himself between the stormtroopers and Dex, and Dex says for them to run and to leave him here, and that they agreed. And we're told that weeks before, Dex had told them that if they were invaded, he was the most vulnerable because of his bulk, and he simply couldn't move fast enough if the worst happened. And so he had pretty much forced them to promise that they would leave him behind, that they would escape if they could and leave him behind. And he had forced them to agree, and he thinks it was best if at least a few of them were able to escape. And Dex tells them that he's led a long life, and he said, sometimes scoundrels laugh, but I got one. And he says he was ready to give up his life if he had to, and he said, "But you boys, you have a long way to go." And Keats and Cohen think that yes, they've given their words, but they're not going to leave Dex behind. They can't leave him behind. And the blaster fires seem so thick that it seems like dancing light. And then the really moment happens. Dex gets shot, and his head lolls over a bit. He stumps a bit, and Keats yells at Cohen to cover him, and he leaps over onto Dex's chair, and he pushes the velocity, and he darts flying straight toward the stormtroopers, and Cohen grabs onto the back of the repulsor lift chair, and they go through the stormtroopers. They fly down the corridor and get to the turbo lift. And keep in mind, Cohen, he has no idea if Dex is alive or dead. He just knows he's shot. And Cohen, he throws himself at the hidden, and also the chair's starting to break apart. Once the fire hits it, it starts to buck and slow. And Cohen throws himself at the hidden panel and activates the turbo lift door. They only have a few seconds now, and they make their way into the turbo lift. And It says Dex's head along and his 6 arms on Glimply, but he has 4 arms, not 6, so is it referring to his legs? Are they arms? Yeah, that was a bit confusing. It's Dex has 4 arms, not 6. Unless it meant 6 limbs, you know, that would make more sense. And Keats doesn't know if he's alive or dead, and Cohen is trying to close the door, and he's shouting, "Close!" And eventually it finally closes, and they make their way down just before, it closes just before the stormtroopers can round the corner, and they make their way down into the tunnel, which is damp and cool, and then they push and pull the chair out the turbo lift, and Cohen says that there's an airspeed that they can use, and they have to leave the chair. And Keats peers at Dex, and he wonders if he's dead. And Dex opens an eye, and he says, "You gave me your word." And Keats sees it's taking Dex a great deal of effort to speak at the moment. And he leans close to Dex's ear and says, "Since when is my word worth anything, you monkey lizard? You should have known better." And they hear an explosion above, which causes the tunnel to shudder. Dex winces, but Keats sees the light in his eyes, and he thinks he'll make it. And Dex says, "What are you waiting for then, boys? Get me out of here!" And that's where we end the chapter. This was incredibly tense. This was a very tense chapter. The moment where Dex got shot, you know, even I was wondering, is Dex dead or not? I assumed he wasn't dead. Because I don't think because from what I remember, he doesn't die in the safe house in Orange District in Thuggers Alley. But you know, it was still quite tense. So it was a very tense chapter, and even when Dex got shot, it was a bit like, oh, is he actually dead or not? And I assumed he wasn't dead, because back in Secret Weapon, Curran was shot, and as it just turns out, he got shot in the shoulder. But even then, you know, Keats back in Death on Naboo, he got shot in the back, and he's alright. So it is, you know, it's, no, not Death on Naboo, sorry, Underworld. It was at the very end of Underworld, if you remember. You know how devastated I was when Keats got shot in not Death on Naboo, in Underworld. I was devastated at that. So I'm happy he's still alive. I'm happy he's still alive. What else can we talk about? Again, it was just a very tense chapter. A very tense chapter. Next chapter's focusing on Trevor and Rygal. We only have 4 more chapters. Which are really only taking up about 20 pages or so. About 21 pages, so you never know, maybe I'll read them. Tonight, I mean. We'll see. What else can we talk about? Again, Dex's promise, you know, he was ready to go, you know, and I like how Keats and Curran did not leave him behind. They did not hesitate to leave him behind. In fact, they fought even harder to protect him, even after he got shot. So, yeah, you really see their loyalty there. And even though Keats is in a very serious situation, you know, it still doesn't fail to be funny. You know, even with the "what makes you think we leave you behind, you monkey lizard?" And also, because of the voice, I picture Keats with, you know, this kind of voice. It just, to me, suits him perfectly. So... which makes a lot of the lines a bit more funny, because he sounds a lot more gruff when he gets angry. who can deliver things much more comedically. To me, Keats is a mix of a comedic and serious character, and I think he can kind of bring moments of light into darker scenes. And I think, again, that voice, that's to me, that's just Keats's voice. It's always going to be Keats's voice in my mind. It's just the perfect voice for him, in my opinion. So yeah. What else? I'm not sure if I have anything else to say, actually. So I'm going to say I'll end the review here. So thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Another day, another chapter. It's the next day now, and I've just read chapter 20 of Last of the Jedi Master of Deception. And I've just gone too far back. I need to go to chapter 20, not chapter 19. Here we go. So, Tobin Ganter was waiting at a platform, not at a hidden landing platform close to the Orange District, and he's surrounded by speeders and decks, and Weigao and Trevor have brought Lina Nowtree back to him, and they embrace, and Trevor turns away to give them a bit of privacy, but also because they're reminding him of the love he hasn't seen since his family passed away. And he doesn't like being reminded, we've been told that. He doesn't like being reminded of his family. It kind of sickens him, makes him upset. He's usually able to put his mind onto other things. And when they finally move apart, they come towards Weigao and Trevor holding hands, and Tobin thanks Weigao. And Lina smiles, and Trevor just has never noticed how beautiful she is until now, because she just always looks so sad and strained. And they've got the Star Cruiser there, and the lights of the street lanes above are starting to light up because of it switching over tonight, because of it reaching evening now. And Weigao says that there's a space cruiser for them to use, and do they need a safe destination? And Tobin says there's a place they know, a place where they were happy once on Miller. And Weigao nods and says there's not too much Imperial activity there, and he included fresh ID docs in the cruiser for them. And Tobin says, and I've been waiting for this, but he says, they sent me to despair. They separated all the scientists. We were not allowed to speak to others with different areas of knowledge. I was kept with the structural engineers, but I know there were weapons delivery technicians and system scientists. Chemists. It's a huge effort to build something terrible. Weigao nods and says he'll tell Ferus. And Lina hands Weigao something, and she explains it's the last remnants of the awful project that Jenna Zanarbor was working on, the documentation and the memory agent itself, and she explains that all records of it has been destroyed. Zanna's records of it has been destroyed. She just says Zanarbor's records have been destroyed, as well as her mind. I suggest you destroy this too. And Trevor is shocked when Weigao, who is usually very reserved, embraces the two of them. And he goes to Lina first, then Tobin. And it shocks him because he's usually so reserved, and he's not doing it with the awkwardness Trevor would have expected. And Lina says that you saved our lives and we'll never forget that. And I was half expecting Weigao to inject the memory agents into them there and then, so they could forget it and be protected. But no. No, he doesn't do that. And instead Weigao, that he says that they saved his once, and if they ever need him, they just got a call. and if they ever need him, he will come, and they're bound now by the stars and the Force, and Rygar and Trevor wait until the Star Cruiser's off in the space lane, even when they can't even distinguish the space cruiser from the other ships. And Trevor says, I've been saying goodbye an awful lot these days. It never gets easier somehow. And Rygar, with his usual few words, just says no. And they make their way, and Trevor says, I think I'm done for a while. And they make their way back to the Orange District. And Rygar notices that the streets are almost empty, and they notice something's wrong. And they make their way back to Thugger's Alley. And they can start smelling something, and they see Thugger's Alley, and it's been vaporised. It's just a blank space. There's nothing there. It's just been completely vaporised, and the ground's still smoking. And Trevor just goes, Dex, Keats, Curran. And Rygar tells him to come, but Trevor's just frozen in shock and devastation. Like, come on, Trevor's already thought Keats was dead one time. Don't let him think that again. The mighty Keats is just... You can't do that to Trevor. You can't have him think someone he really likes is dead twice. Come on. But Rygar has to lead him away because he knows there are probably spies there waiting to see you all turn up, and expertly Gal leads him through the back alleys until they reach an area where the crowds are milling in cafes and loitering outside noisy and dim restaurants. And Trevor still feels shocked to the core, and every time he walks, he's not even conscious that he's walking. He isn't even aware that he's walking, and every step brings another name to his head, and he wonders, and he just starts thinking, who else had been there? Flame? Maybe Orion, because he would drop in time to time, though he would spend most of his time on the asteroid now. And he wonders about Solace, who never knew where she turned up, and then Rygar says Flame, quietly, and Trevor's a bit caught off guard. And it's like, hey. And then he realises that Rygar spotted Flame, and they make their way out, and relief washes through Trevor, and they make their way over to Flame, who's sitting outside the cafe, with a mug of tea in front of her, and her hands are shaking. And she sees Trevor and hugs him and says, "You're safe." And Rygar says, "As you are. And she says that she doesn't know what's happened, but the word is everyone there is dead. They didn't take prisoners, everyone there is dead, and that no one could have survived. And Trevor asks what they do now, and he's trying to swallow his grief and shock, although he knows he isn't able to. And it says, it sat like a rock inside his stomach and chokes his every breath. And Rygar sits down next to chair and says that sits down next to Flame and says that they go on. You can't have... And that's the very end of the chapter. You can't have Trevor thinking Keats is dead twice. Look, at least we haven't been gaslighted into thinking Keats is dead again, because I don't think I could take that again. I did check Keats' Wikipedia page. It says he's still alive after these books. I accidentally saw it, but it says he's still alive after these books. But I'm still kind of expecting him to die. But I don't know if I can... I'm just glad that we knew Keats is alive when we were told about that. Because I don't think I could deal with having to cope with Keats dying again. You know, we thought he was dead back in Underworld, at the end of Underworld, and luckily Jeff on the Boo Maid told us that he isn't dead, but still. Oh. Again, Nina Nauchi and Tobin Ganter. Nice to see that they're still going. And I don't really think we were taught anything new about Despair. You know, we kind of knew it was still a project about building something, like with the factories. How it had something to do with deliveries and that they were building something, you know, it's nothing really new that we don't know already. But now we know where Tobin was. Again, I was kind of half expecting Rygal to reject the two of them with every ancient, but luckily he didn't. And, you know, that seemed very out of, looking at it now, yeah, that would have been very out of character, but I was half expecting him to do so. It would have been quite funny, like a moment if it did happen though. I hope Rygal, Trevor, and everyone else learns that Keats, Corin and Dex are alright. You know, I really want them to know that they're alright. At least by the end of this book. Because it's how are they going to find out that but it's also like how they're going to find out they're alright, you know. Well, maybe not Dex, maybe Dex isn't fully alright, you know, he's got shots, but he'll be out, he'll live. Yeah, it did take quite a dark turn, this chapter, you know. We went from a fairly sweet opening with Lina and Tobin to a fairly dark ending. So, yeah. What else? I'm not really sure I have anything else to say. I did kind of think when I saw Flame, you know, it's like, you liar! Because I was still a bit suspicious of her, but you never know, she may not turn out to be a spy, even though she probably will, but, yeah, it is a bit, Anyway, I think that brings an end to this review, so thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello everyone, I have just read chapter 21 of Last of the Jedi, I almost said Against the Empire, Master of Deception. So Bale is still refusing to believe there could be a spy in his palace, he just can't fathom the idea. But after upgrading his system for the hollow communication with Obi-Wan, he picked up a bug, and that someone had invaded the system and placed a monitor on it, and Bale says, luckily, it doesn't appear that my code has been broken yet, but a record of who I contact can be just as damaging. I wiped our communication with Obi-Wan, of course, but everything that came before has no doubt been reported. And Ferus muses on how only he, Breya, and Dylan knew of the mission that Reyes Antilles was on, and he starts suspecting Dealer, and Bale says no, she's his sister-in-law, Reyes' sister, and her loyalties and questions, and Ferris says Memory's a new employee. Bale said she's the daughter of one of his most trusted friends, and Ferris says, look, Senator Organa, someone has to be the spy. And Bale says nothing, and Ferris says they have to set a trap, because it's the only way, because someone's here at the palace passing information to Dart and Zimba. And he says, look, I know you're fighting a losing battle for an Imperial governor to come here. You've been losing the battle to keep an Imperial governor off Ultron, and he says he's lost the battle, he's arriving tomorrow. And he says that Dira tells him that there are some who want him to report, who want to offer armed resistance, buy weapons, and that would violate everything he stands for. Ferris asks if she goes to the market often, and he says that she does. She has done for quite recently, and she comes back with muffins. And Ferris finds it strange when Memily is such a good baker, and he wonders why. And he thinks back to his meeting with Dira at the spaceport, and I've been distracted searching for the spy and thinking about his use of his own anger, and how he tapped into the dark side of the Force and what that meant, and he hasn't thought it through, and he says he has to go. And Bale asks, now, what about setting the trap? Ferris says that if he's right, he'll come back with a plan. Also, interestingly enough, it says Ferus says, I saw deer at the market at dawn yesterday. Even though this is still the same, even though the governor's arriving tomorrow. And Ferus saw deer at the market that day. It's made very clear the governor's is arriving tomorrow, so yeah, it's a bit confusing. It's quite confusing. And this only takes place over a 2-day period. It can't take place over anything more. At least not after at least not after what happens next. This maybe mind you though, it is still at evening or so. Maybe it's midnight now. Maybe it's late enough to say yesterday. Otherwise it just doesn't add up. It just doesn't add up. But anyway, moving on. Ferus makes his way back through the market and he sees Start and Simba selling toys, and he keeps out of sight but he keeps an eye on stuff, and he occasionally buys something to avoid suspicion. Once he discovers what he's looking for, he makes his way back to the palace because there's no time to lose. And he says to Bale that he must write a memo saying Alderaan will meet the governor with armed resistance. And Bale asks, why would he do that? Alderaan has no weapons. And Ferus explains that they do because Start and Simba was the conduit. He explains that someone from the Empire, and he suspects Vader, arranged for a shipment of weapons to arrive at the spaceport, and Simba was arranged to hide them and then move them to another location at the right time. And Bale asks where, and Ferus is at the open air market. And Bale says, it's not getting this, why would Vader do that? And Ferus says, he doesn't want to do that. He's giving them weapons, so he has a reason to install an Imperial governor and put their planet under Imperial control. So he can expose the weapons that way. And Bale goes, of course, that's exactly what he thinks. And Ferus starts explaining his plan. But if you send that message that you will meet the governor with armed resistance, it will go to the Emperor himself. They will be delighted that you've fallen in with their plans without even knowing it. You've been told that your people want you to fight. They all looked ashen by Dealer. And so they will arrive here with weapons and ships, and they will find nothing. Because we're going to get those weapons out. You're going to detain Simba for questioning and then let him go. Meanwhile, the market will be cleaned of weapons. Then, when the Empire arrives, they'll meet no resistance. They'll look like fools. The people of Alderaan will be the heroes, and the spy will be discredited. His information will be suspect. Not only his information on you, but his information on Leia. And Bale says it's absolutely diabolical, but he likes the idea. And he says, just as long as his people don't get hurt. And Ferus says that the Empire will bring Star Destroyers to scare him, but they won't attack. And Bale stands and says he has work to do. And soon we have another time jump. And Hydra's closing the hollow file. And she looks over at Ferus and says, you're intending to submit this report? Ferus says, yes. And Hydra says, but so you've come to the conclusion that the report of a Force-sensitive child was without foundation? Ferus says that he has, and Hydra says she's not reached that conclusion. Ferus starts explaining his reasoning, saying, we've conducted dozens of interviews, combed through official records, examined the site, done surveillance. It's clear to me that whatever happened wasn't noteworthy. Not an example of force, but a coincidence so unremarkable that nobody remarks on it. There is a reason nobody is talking to us. Sure, Ferus said. They hate us. That is immaterial. They're hiding something. They're afraid of us. With good reason, so they aren't going to give us any information. But let's not confuse that with actually having something to say. I say we close the file. I'm your superior. Hydra hesitates and says, technically, that's true. And Ferus says, is it true or not true? And he doesn't want to push Hydra because Hydra contempts him, and if he pushes Hydra too much, she'll push back. He thinks he'll have to discredit her as well as Starton, and she says, And also we're told on this way to on the way he tried to reach Keats at the Gazali, and he wanted Keats to put in some favours with renegade journalists who were setting up the Shadow Net, which is an alternative to Empire Control News, but he was unable to reach him, and he was unable to reach him. There was a lack of response from Keats or anyone at the hideout, and that's worrying him. And Hydra says that it is true, and then her mouth sets angrily and it says, and it is also true that in cases where Inquisitors do not agree, the junior member of the team may write a dissenting report. Ferus says, sure, if you feel you have a solid foundation, despite investigating for 4 days. They've been investigating for 2 days, but now I guess they've been here for another 2 days, so I assume maybe this is after. But yeah, it's a bit eh. The timeline is a bit whacked since what was it, since Secret Weapon. It's been a bit whacked since Secret Weapon. But he says, certainly if you feel you have a solid foundation despite investigating for 4 days and coming up empty-handed, then feel free to clutter the Imperial Archives with another memo. And he says to have fun, but he suggests they move on to the next names on the list and really get something done because it's time to leave Alderaan. And Hydra says she'll file her report immediately, and Ferus thinks, good. And she says that soon Alderaan will know how useless it is to resist. And they'll recognise that the Empire is in charge, and investigations like this will then go smoothly, and the Imperial Governor will see to that. And Ferus wants to smile at her smugness, but he just nods gravely and says yes, and he wishes for that too. And that's where we end the chapter. Ferus's plan is as Bale says, it's diabolical, but it's a good plan. You know, saying that there is open resistance to get the Empire all riled up and think, hey, and then it turns out that no, there is no resistance. But also there is a slight chance it goes wrong. you know, there's a slight chance where if it goes wrong, that's going to be bad. So it's got to be a lot of careful attention in this. Because if the Empire attack without realising, if the Empire just attack, that's not going to be good, and I think there is a possibility that might happen. So yeah. What else can we say? Again, we know it's Steeler. I looked at the next chapter. The first line I saw was, her beloved sister was a spy. So, we know it's Steeler. I kind of knew it was Steeler. I think I brought it up earlier that it was Steeler, wasn't it? Earlier in these reviews that I thought it was Steeler. So, yeah. Also, Hydra, she probably is getting ready to trying to discredit Ferus as well, which is funny because he's trying to discredit her. But yeah, everything's getting a little bit more tense now, and I'm going to be very interested to see what the next book is about. We've had Alderaan for this book. I thought we were going to stay on Alderaan for the next book, but it doesn't look like it's going to be likely that we'll stay on Alderaan for the next book. We may do, but it doesn't seem very likely. I'm hoping we stay on Alderaan, but yeah, it just doesn't seem very likely that we'll be staying on Alderaan for the next book. If anything, it looks like it's probably going to wind up being a little bit we're going to start kind of jumping about a bit, maybe doing multiple investigations or something like that. I have no idea what the next book's going to be about. I have no idea what it's going to be about. I still have 2 more chapters to read, but we're almost at the end, so Yeah, I'm not going to be interested to see what that next book's about, because I have no idea what it's going to be about, and I'm also quite confused by the timeline given here, because sounds like they were searching for 2 days when it's indeed been for 4 days. I assume, what my assumption is, the conversation with Bale and Ferus take place on the 2nd day Ferus is on Alderaan. The market is on the 3rd day, and then the conversations with Hydron is on the 4th day, I assume. That's my assumption, though. I have no idea. It's not been very well made very clear. So yeah. Well, I don't mean not very well made. I never accidentally said that. I mean not made very clear. But yeah, that could have been much better explained. You know. I think that's something that I've brought up quite a bit. There are bits in this book that just could have been much better explained. Like the whole Eviero storyline could have been much better explained. That the timelines in these books since Secret Weapon could have been better explained. It's been... everything up until Secret Weapon was fairly consistent. Now it's gone a bit whack. So it's a bit tough to follow, unfortunately. So yeah. But anyway, I quite enjoyed this chapter, and I think Ferris's plan was a very clever one. But yeah, thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello everyone, I have just read chapter 22 of Last of the Jedi, Master of Deception. I'm almost at the end. I've only really got one more chapter to go, and it doesn't feel right. I still feel like I'm somewhat halfway through the story, even though we're at the end of the story. It's really, really weird. So, you know, hopefully when we get to the next book, the ending of that's feels a bit more conclusive. It probably will have to, because it's the last book, isn't it? But anyway. Bale and Breya are waiting in their sitting room, and Bale broke the news to his wife. And you can see the pain in her. It's broken her heart, and it's, of course, Dealer is a spy. And it says, he has written the message and put a false send on it. He had set this new security control. He had seen with his own eyes on the monitor that Dealer had sneaked into his office, copied his message, and sent it off. And he places a hand over his wife's hand, and we're told that the burden of ruling was on Breya every moment of every day, and that she loved Bale through many separations, and had encouraged his political career, and worried about him during the Clone Wars, and even while she ruled her world and watched out for its citizens, she had drawn her family close, had extended a hand to all her family and her friends, and down to the very last citizen of Alderaan. She was there to fight for them and help them and represent them, and now this. And Dealer makes her way in, and she asks, it's a lovely day, and how about having lunch in the garden? And Breya says that they need to speak with Dealer, and Dealer asks if something's wrong. And Breya continues saying that there's something very wrong and there's a spy in the house. And Dealer says, I see. And she swallows. And Breya says that you are that spy. And Bale admires how Breya is keeping her focus. She isn't letting one bit of her anguish show. And they have no idea what Dealer would do. They didn't know if she would lie and deny it, which is what they were expecting. But no. No. She immediately just gives way and crumples and starts bursting into tears. She drops to the floor with her face in her hands, and she says that it was while she was on Coruscant, and he came to me when I was. She says he came to me when I was visiting Coruscant. And Breya asks if it was Vader, and she nods, and she explains that he threatened her and he was terrifying, and then he said he just wanted to know when Bale was here, when he was planning to leave, and that was at first, and then he wanted more, And again, this is the same trap we've been told how the Empire worked. You know, we were told in one of the previous chapters that how the Empire recruited its spies. It would reassure them that they're not really betraying their neighbours until they've done so much that they have betrayed them. And by the time they realise, it's too late. And you see this happening with Dealer. And Bale says that you gave them information about my private communications. And Dealer says it was only just who he wrote to and who had sent him messages, not what was in them. And Bale says only because you couldn't break the code. And Dealer is adamant that she would never have told them that much, in that she thought the information she gave would be harmless. And Bale continues saying that you told them Ramus Antilles would be returning through the Terra Asta spaceport and he could have been arrested. And Dealer says they had no reason to arrest him and they wanted to discover if he was carrying a message, and she knew his code was unbreakable. Bale says these are merely excuses for the inexcusable. And Breyer shoots him a look and to keep his voice down, and they think, and they're going to do this with their dignity intact. And Breyer continues saying that you told us there were those who wanted to use weapons against the Empire, and was that true? And Dealer says no, she was told to say that, and she knew they would discount it, and it seems such a small thing. And Breyer asked if she gave the report on Leia, and she said that she would never endanger the girls, the kids. And Breyer says that, don't you see that you already have? By becoming a spy, you brought danger to the house. And Zira shakes her head tearfully, and she says, my dear sister, there is already danger in this house. Bale's opposition to the Emperor has placed you there, not me. And Breyer looks at Bale, and he knows he's taken those words to heart. Because that's the thing he feared. That his work would bring danger to his house. And Breyer says, how dare you say that? My husband's courage fills my heart with pride. He does not bring danger to this house, he brings honour to it. You are the one who brought dishonour and danger here. And Bale kisses Breyer's hand, and she turns to him with tears in her eyes, and she says, danger stays, but we will never, ever lose our resolve. And Dira puts her hands over her face again and just says that she's so sorry. She says, I'm so sorry. Breyer says that she's weak, but she's her sister, and she must leave the palace forever. And Dira nods, and Bale says that they've arranged for a secret passage for Dira, and a safe house on Ancori 7. And Dira is surprised and says, I am free to go. And Breyer says, yes, you are free to go. And when Ferus hears of this from the Organas, he is astonished. He says, you let her go? You had an opportunity. She could have fed them more information. You could have used her. And he's absolutely in disbelief. And Breyer says that she's family. And Ferus says at the very least she deserved prison. And Breyer says again, she's family. Ferus says that they could be putting themselves in danger, and that they could track her down and they could still use her. Bale says if he made a mistake, he'd rather do it on the side of forgiveness. Ferus has no answer to this, but he knows what the Tunic's going to say. Well, what is Tunic's going to say? What the Holocron is going to say, which is of course it's foolish to not destroy your enemies, foolish and cowardly. But Ferus looks with his heart at Bale and Breyer, and he admires their courage. He finds them to be among the bravest people he's ever known. And he thinks there's too much heartbreak in the galaxy now, and there are too many families broken and friends torn apart. And he wonders what it would be like to never feel heartbreak again, for all that grief, to if you could conquer that grief and tamp it down permanently and never feel it again. And the holocron says that you can. Ferus starts sweating, and he feels short of breath, and feels the heat of the holocron on his chest. And the holocron says all of that and more can be yours as easily as saying one word. And Ferus thinks yes. And that's where we end the chapter. I like how Dealer, she didn't deny it. I think it's a bit of a trope for, people to start denying it immediately. But I like that Dealer didn't deny it. How she immediately admitted to it. And it was a nice subversion of expectations. And she was, for the most part, at least, very honest. She was completely honest about it. The thing about not being able to break the code and send those messages, maybe she was lying about how she didn't want to break that code. Bale has that suspicion, but we don't really know. But, with how honest she was, I think it's safe to say that she wasn't lying about that. And I do think she got off quite easy. But at the same time, I like that happened. I like that she didn't get significantly punished. The Organas understood that there's too much pain and grief in the galaxy at the moment. And I think it was a nice thing for them not to do that. Again, I think some of the moments in this chapter, if you swap Bale and Breyer out with, villains, it definitely could have felt like they were a bit villainous in this chapter. Even though of course Breyer was the villain, they definitely could have felt a bit more villainous. And I think the fact that they do forgive and allow her to be safe in a safe house on, what was it, Ancori 7? Yeah, Ancori 7. I think just goes to show that, they understand that there's too much heartbreak and torn hearts in this in the galaxy at the moment, and they're willing to keep bits of it intact, but also still willing to be stern enough to say when enough is enough, And I think I think it's quite a sweet thing that this chapter showed. And I'm equally as shocked that with Ferus, with how they didn't do, and how they didn't really punish her. Ferus has a point. They can still use Steeler. They can track her down. They can use her. But the Organas are willing to take that risk. They're willing to take that risk, and again, it just reaffirms how kind they are, how sweet they are, and you really have to appreciate them more. I think even just this book alone, has done wonders for the Organas. For me, I know the Organas exist, but they never really felt like a massive presence. So to see more of them here is quite sweet. And you really get to understand them more as characters. So yeah, I know there's probably novels out there featuring Bail Organa as the main lead. It wouldn't surprise me if there are, but I haven't read them. I read any of the stories featuring Bail. Pretty much all I've seen are the movies, really, and of course Obi-Wan Kenobi. So I'm not too acquainted with how his character is, but I quite enjoyed this chapter, and it was a nice subversion of expectations. you know, as I said, you know, I think we were expecting dealer to do night and therefore there to be a much more severe punishment, but I like that it subverted expectations in that way. And it just reaffirms how the Organas are a family. They're not some mad, nasty tyrants. They're a family wanting to bring good and wanting to restore a peace to the galaxy. You know, and I think that really is reaffirmed in this chapter, and I think this chapter kind of reaffirms what the Organas are about. Now, they can still be very firm, but they are still family, and they still view the people of Alderaan as family, and I think that's quite sweet. I'm going to bring the review to an end here. I don't really have anything else to say. We've only got one more chapter left. I cannot believe there's only one more chapter left. No, I think there's only one more chapter left. Yep, only one more chapter left. And that's featuring Bail and Ferus, so I assume we'll eventually cut away to Palpatine and Vader or something. But yeah, that brings an end to this review. So thank you all for watching. And you know what I'm gonna say. Goodbye. Hello, I have just read chapter 23 of Last of the Jedi, Master of Deception. And in turn, I have finished Master of the Jedi, Master of Deception. So Ferus and Bail Organa are at the spaceport, and it's what they've expected, but it is still a terrifying sight to see all the Imperial ships in the inner atmosphere above, with the Governor's Star Cruiser being flanked with Imperial fighters, and Bail says he hates this. Ferus asks if the reporters are in place. Bail nods, saying the ShadowNet will have a simultaneous broadcast of the arrival. And he says the news will be all over the core. And Ferus says that they will take their time landing for maximum effect, and then he slips away because of course it can't really be seen with Bail. It would be bad for both of them. And the first ship to land is the transport ship with stormtroopers, and they pour out with their weapons held up. Now we're told all traffic have been stopped for this arrival, and then the Imperial Governor's Star Cruiser lands, and the ramp descends, and another squad of stormtroopers come trotting down, and then the Governor, who is a small man in a purple cape, comes down, and next to him is Emperor Palpatine, and a shudder goes through the crowd because they weren't expecting the Emperor to be there, and the Governor calls out that calls out, the people of Alderaan, we come in peace, we are here to protect you. Word has reached our ears that you are prepared to fight. We do not wish a confrontation. The Empire is about peace. And then Bail steps forward and says the galaxy knows full well Alderaan is peaceful and that they have no weapons. And Palpatine says that they shall see. And the stormtroopers start searching the markets, but they find nothing. And I'm just going to read out this little bit. It was the sight of the Emperor here we go. The Imperial Governor stood by the Emperor's side, surrounded by hundreds of troops. The market was wrecked. The people stood watching, not afraid. Ferus saw, smiling. It was the sight of the Emperor surrounded by ruined fruit, by squads of stormtroopers facing off against a threat that consisted of children and ordinary citizens out with their shopping baskets. It was the sight of the Imperial Governor, so slight and small, with his ornate purple cape, and bodyguards with raised rifles around him. On Alderaan, the sight did not make sense. And the crowd starts bursting out into laughter. They start bursting out into laughter, and the Governor says to disperse and return to the transport. Ferus smiles, and it says, Ferus smiled, so did the Emperor. And then Vader walks up beside Ferus and says this amuses him. And Ferus says, "Why show says all this effort for one little governor? Why the show of force? There's no resistance in Alderaan." And Vader says resistance is everywhere, and it's up to them. It's up to the Empire where and when they crush it. And he gave these people a hollow victory, and Ferus denies it, saying he had nothing to do with it. And Vader says, "So you say. Their defeat will come. This humiliation will not be forgotten. The Empire chooses its time. Yesterday on Coruscant we became tired of observing the resistance sail right under our noses, so we crushed it." And Ferus says, "Good for you," but he starts getting anxious. And Vader continues explaining it was Slugger's Alley in the Orange District, and everyone died. And he may have even known the leader of the group, Dexter Jetster. And Ferus is filled with shock and grief. But now's not the time, and he decides to hit Vader back, saying, "When I mentioned Mustafar to you the other day, I fear I upset you." And Ferus thinks Vader must have been prepared for him to bring it up, because he didn't show any ripple of concern. And he says, "Save your fears for yourself." And it happens instantaneously. And it feels as if Ferus feels as if his head's been blown off, because all of a sudden everything clicks. And I think this would have even been a bigger moment to people who have read Jedi Quest. As it says, here it says, every clue clicks into place, every suspicion, every nagging sense that he was missing something important. They had stood outside the council room together. "I'm afraid for you. You think admitting you were wrong opens you up to attack," Ferus had said. He still felt shell-shocked and strange from his conference with the Jedi Masters. He still couldn't believe he had just resigned from the Jedi Order. Anakin's lip had curled. "I think you should save your fears for yourself." And Ferus immediately now knows that Vader is Anakin. He has no idea how, but he knows it. He's reeling, and it says, reeling, Ferus stood next to Vader as the Emperor approached them. And all of a sudden there's a storm coming on, Palpatine, and Ferus can feel the Emperor's fury, and he just says, "A trap. I could kill them all if I wanted." And Vader says there's nothing stopping him, and Palpatine tells him that he needs to remember that they're being monitored, and someday, yes, but not now. And Vader says nothing, and Ferus is starting to enjoy himself, because Anakin never liked being shited in public, and he'd always wanted to be the best. So the fact he's being put down by his master is amusing Ferus. And the holocron says, "Use it. Use what you know. Bring him down. He is half of what he is." And it says, as if the Emperor had heard the voice as well, he turned to Ferus, and the heat leaves his voice, and he says that "you have done your job well." And Ferus feels Vader's frustration and wonders if he could destroy the spaceport with it. Palpatine smiles and says, "It is time for you to take a second in command, Lord Vader," he said, chuckling. "And I think Ferus Erlan is perfect for the job." And that's where we end the book. I quite enjoy this chapter. The whole scene, man, the whole moment after they've searched the market and it's just nothing, was absolutely hilarious. I was laughing before even the crowd was laughing. It was hilarious, and it's going to be quite the sight for the Shadow Net. So I quite enjoyed this chapter. It was a very funny chapter. Suddenly everything's clicked for Ferus. You know he's going to be livid at Obi-Wan. He's going to be absolutely livid at him for keeping the secret of Vader from him. Because, he said that Anakin was dead to him. And, he says he's probably gonna know. I think Ferus will immediately, when he calls Obi-Wan next, he's going to say, "You knew Vader was Anakin," and do you have to keep hiding things from me? He's going to say that, and Ferus will know that Obi-Wan knows Anakin is Vader. You know it. Um, I, it so I'm going to be looking forward to that conversation next book. If there is that conversation next book. Also, this is going to be quite interesting. Ferus has been promoted from Inquisitor into second in command. Now Vader's second in command. I think that's what it was. To me, it seemed... I was struggling to actually figure out what that meant. I think it means Ferus becomes Vader, now ranks just below Vader, I think that's what it's referring to, but I could be wrong on that. We'll see how it goes in the next book. So yeah, again, I'm surprised Hydra didn't pop up in this book. So yeah. So let's kind of just talk about the book as a whole. I think it was quite I think it was quite a fun book. I think it was quite a fun book. I'm surprised we had nothing, absolutely nothing, with Solace. She got mentioned once while Trevor's grieving. I am shocked that Solace had no presence in the book whatsoever, outside of Ferris's grief. Not Ferris's grief, Trevor's grief, sorry. Out of all the characters I would have expected to be in the book, Solace was one of them. And I know Keats and Curran weren't in Return of the Dark Side, and they only had one mention in that book as well, but for Solace, she's such a prevalent character. I am shocked she was not in this book. Now, I do know she's in the next one, and I spoiled myself again with her death. I know she's going to die next book. Mind you, I know quite a lot of the characters are going to die next book on the asteroid. Now, I'm going to be interesting to see what the next book is about. We have really got no idea what's happening next book, so I hope that gets cleared up at the start of the next book. Because at the moment it just seems like I have no idea what's going to happen. I have no idea what's going to happen next book, and I doubt it's going to be more stuff on Alderaan. The Alderaan storyline here feels pretty much completed. So it's going to be interesting to see what that is. What else can we talk about? Let's go over the ranking for the book. Now, what was my list before? I was Dark Warning at the bottom. Actually, I should really just write this down, shouldn't I? Actually, give me a moment. Okay, so at my bottom spot I had Dark Warning, Underworld, then Against the Empire, then Death on the Boot, then Desperate Mission, then Secret Weapon, then Return of the Dark Side. Where would I put Master of Deception? I don't think it's within the top 3. Again, I enjoyed the book, but I think it maybe shared some of the same problems as Against the Empire, where it could have felt a bit more connected, I think it was quite a good book. I'm not sure, I'll take that back. I'm not sure if it had the same issues as Against the Empire. It definitely felt like a much more well-rounded story, a much more completed story. Whereas Against the Empire was a little bit, didn't quite feel as well-rounded. So it could have been, I think, Against the Empire could have been a lot better. I think it was still a good book, but it could have been better. So with Master of Deception, I don't think it's within, Reigns or Return of the Dark Side, Secret Weapon or Desperate Mission. Actually, do I put Desperate Mission above Secret Weapon? No, I can't bring myself to put it above Desperate Mission. Desperate Mission probably is the better book, but the ending for Secret Weapon, the ending chapters where Rome's die, those are just incredible. So I can't bring myself to do that. I think Master of Deception was a good book, but the Alderaan storyline very much felt complete. The Clive and Astrid storyline, that just centres at like, what was it, chapter 17? They're still trapped in that room. And that's the last we've seen of them in that book. So it definitely feels like that could have been... has at least had one more chapter to it. Because I feel like just getting trapped in the room, and that's where we have to pick up with them next book, just feels a bit anticlimactic. I definitely think the Eve the Arrow storyline could have been so much more well explained. It could have been explained in a much better way. And at least in my opinion, it was explained absolutely terribly. The way that Jude Watson went about explaining it, it just still does not make sense to me. Some of the bits I can get my head around, but some of the bits I can't. Like, I actually had to write a book notes for it. It was like, if Eve the Arrow has hidden her wealth in an account controlled by the Empire, it's like, you know, that makes no sense to me. Of course, it turns out not to be the case. She controls the account, the Empire moved it, but it still just feels, it just could have been so much more well explained. It could have been way better explained. Do not ask me about the Eve the Arrow storyline. Don't ask me to try and explain it. I do think maybe this book do feel like it was missing some things, and I do think it was because of the lack of Solace and Flame. I think it's because of the lack of Solace and Flame. They could have been much better. I think they could have been implemented in some way, because it definitely feels a bit bare without them, especially since they've been in all the books since their introduction. You know, Flame, she had a bit of a presence, but not a whole lot. I think she was only in 2 chapters this book and was mentioned for the rest of them. And Solace, you know, she just got briefly mentioned in Trevor's thoughts. So, you know, that could have been way better done. I think, again, Keats, I was really excited when he had a bit of a bigger role, and then he just had, and that was just like his only role in the book, really, aside from escaping. But I do think Master of Deception has brought in some interesting stuff as well. You know, it's gave that prospect of Keats, Dexter and Curran being presumed dead. That's going to be interesting to see how that develops. Of course, we've still got the Eve the Arrow is the Eve the Arrow Flame storyline, which is becoming quite more interesting now that we know Eve the Arrow is an Emperor's elite. She's among the Emperor's elite. So some of the stuff, I think the main problem is that the Alderaan storyline feels so complete, yet the other storylines feel so incomplete. You know, I think the Trevor and Rygel storyline, you know, that literally only took 3 chapters to do. It literally only took 3 chapters to do. It feels maybe a bit too short. It feels like it should have taken place over many more chapters, like how the storyline with Trevor rescuing Loom took place, you know, and that took place over quite a few chapters. This just feels like it took, like in 2 chapters they've rescued Lynn and Naochi. The 3rd chapter is just them saying goodbye to Lynn and Naochi and Toby and Ganta, and saying good, and then finding out the erased, or presumably dead, even though they aren't. Their storyline could have been much more in depth, and it just feels so bare. It just feels so much more bare, especially compared to the Eve the Arrow storyline and Alderaan storyline. It feels like there should have been a bit more to it, because it just feels like, okay, we've gone into Sanabor. No, it was actually took place over the course of 4 chapters, sorry. But, you know, it's just, right, we'll go into Sanabor's room, we learn when she's coming home, we've rescued Helena, we've got her back to Sobin Ganta. You know, if that's pretty much, you can pretty much just summarise it like that. You've literally just summarised, you know, 3 of those 4 chapters. I didn't even have to mention the first chapter the storyline begins in. So it does feel a bit bare. It feels very bare, that storyline. And I think it's also because of just how simple it was. It was as simple as learning she's going to come, learning where the landing platform that Jenna Sanabor comes home on, then follow, then making sure we're in the same turbo lift as her, and we pretty much saved her there, saved her in the now tree there, you know. It felt very simple. It felt way too simple. It definitely felt like there could have been a bit more complexity as to how they have to rescue her. You know, especially with these books, you know, often things go wrong and nothing really seems to go massively wrong. I think the Clive and Astrid storyline, it feels a bit rough because it feels like it didn't have any conclusion to lead into the next book. It feels like their storyline just stopped, and it's going to have to be picked back up where it left off in the next book, rather than having a smooth transition into the next book. You know, if we had one chapter of them getting out and learning something important, that can then lead into the next book, I think I would feel differently on it, but it isn't quite like that. And I think that's maybe the problem with this book. The Alderaan storyline feels very complete. The storyline with Clive and Astrid is quite literally left in the middle of the storyline, with no smooth transition for it going into the next book. And the Trevor storyline is very bare. And I think you've got 3 massive imbalances there, and even though I think the book is a good book, I want to make that clear, even though I'm criticising the book, I think it is a good book. I think that Babe does probably bring it down. I do think it is probably better than Against... It's either going between Underworld and Against the Empire, or Against the Empire and Death from the Boo. I'm probably going to put it between Underworld and Against the Empire. I think I'm going to be happy with that. Now I just got to move everything up a number. So the list now is Dark Warding at the bottom, then Underworld, then Master of Deception, then Against the Empire, then Death on the Boo, then The Desperate Mission, then Secret Weapon, then Return of the Dark Side. Oh, I just forgot a Tangled Web. I've just realised I forgot a Tangled Web. Oh dear. I was wondering why I wasn't going up. Okay, I need to put in Tangled Web. I completely forgot about Tangled Web. Okay, give me a moment, I completely forgot about a Tangled Web. Oopsie daisy. Okay, so... Actually, now I feel like I have to modify the list now that we're including the Tangled Web. Again, what did I say? Did I say a Tangled Web was better than the Desperate Mission? Actually, yeah, I think a Tangled Web is actually better than the Desperate Mission. Let me swap them around. Actually, I think a Tangled Web might just actually have to take the top spot, actually. I think a Tangled Web, yeah, I think it's safe to say a Tangled Web's probably the best one so far. Okay, so now including a Tangled Web, because I forgot a Tangled Web, the bottom spot is Dark Warning, then Underworld, then Master of Deception, then Against the Empire, then Death on Naboo, then The Desperate Mission, then Secret Weapon. Now I'm going to swap around the Desperate Mission and Secret Weapon, actually. I think it doesn't sit right with them being that other way around. Okay, so starting again. At the bottom spot is Dark Warning, then in 8 we have Underworld, then 7's Master Deception, 6 is Against the Empire, 5 is Death on Naboo, 4 is Secret Weapon, 3 is The Desperate Mission, 2 is Return of the Dark Side, and for now, 1 is A Tangled Web. Yeah, I'm quite happy with that, at least. I think, again, I really did enjoy Master Deception, but it just has a bit of imbalance with its 3 storylines. One isn't very well explained. It doesn't even feel like it has a satisfying conclusion to move into the next book. One is just so bare. It feels like it could have just been like merged with one of the storylines and not really have anything. Because it feels more like a side quest than an actual storyline. And the other one actually feels like a completed, well-rounded storyline. It's massively imbalanced, and I think that's probably the main problem with the book. Its storylines are a bit imbalanced. But I think, despite its imbalance, I think it is quite a good book. I would suggest it. But yeah, I think there are some of the other books are definitely better. Even Against the Empire is better. And again, I enjoyed Against the Empire. I did enjoy Against the Empire, but it's just, to me, it just doesn't feel like there was enough connectivity going on in that book. Maybe as the other books, they felt like they had a bit of connectivity going on. And, in this book as well, there is no connectivity between the 3 storylines. There is no connectivity between them. The Ferus storyline doesn't have any relevance to the Trevor storyline or the Evie Arrow storyline. There is no connectivity between any of them. And I really don't think we can call the chapter with Dexter and Keats and Corin escaping the attack on Fugazzali a storyline. It is literally just a chapter. So you cannot really call that a storyline. Sorry. So it literally just is a chapter in the story. Yeah, I quite enjoyed Master of Deception. I also quite enjoyed this last chapter. I think, it was quite a funny chapter. But yeah, I think that brings an end to this review, and as well, an end to the reviews of Master of Deception. So next up is Last of the Jedi Reckoning, which is going to be the last book. Let's see if I get to it. Hopefully I will. So, yeah. Anyway, thank you all for watching. And for the last time for the Master of Deception reviews, goodbye.